Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is almost New Year's Eve. I just got used to typing 25 at the end of all of the dates on the top of all my notes. Now I have to get ready to start typing 26. So these years are starting to roll by a little bit quicker, man. But
welcome to being old, Trevor.
yeah,
Welcome to being old.
Thank you. Happy to be
Exactly
here.
how it goes, man. Man, is it December already? I just learned
man.
that. Well, I'll show you, but at least you're not like, man, I just learned how to start doing that on my checkbook. That's normally what old people really do. It's like, I just finally got used to doing that on my checkbook. Like, oh, wait, they still do that?
No worries, man.
Yeah.
No worries. But, folks, we have another really exciting show coming your way today. We're going to start this off. Part one, there's been a lot of talk since the regular season's been over for Notre Dame after the playoff snub and after the decision to sit out of the bowl game. Been talks about should Notre Dame join a conference and what should their schedules look like. There's just this notion that Notre Dame's schedules and future schedules are considered weak because it's not a part of a conference. We're going to have a conversation about that and share our thoughts and talk about why that is what it is, why we do or do not think Notre Dame should go in a certain direction. And then in part two of today's show, we're going to be talking about the college football playoffs. The quarterfinals start tomorrow when Ohio State takes on Miami. New Year's Eve kickoff is at 8 p.m., but then obviously the three games on New Year's Day. So a lot of fun things to talk about today here, Brian, but where we're going to start, obviously this is Irish Breakdown. We're talking from a Notre Dame standpoint. Like I said, a lot of conversation around Notre Dame, even though they're not playing in a bowl game. You would think that they're gearing up for it with how much conversation is going on around South Bend. So lots to talk about today here for Notre Dame.
Yeah, and you know, I just felt it was important for us to have a conversation about Notre Dame and the schedule and just big picture, because there is a lot of conversation going around about, you know, join a conference, and really just a lot of faulty, flawed logic. And you're even starting to see some Notre Dame fans start to talk about this. And where this topic kind of came from is there was a post on the message board yesterday that talked about how Notre Dame needs to join a conference. And it was, I'm not trying to take a shot at the poster. I won't say the person's name because I'm not trying to call that person out individually, because he's not alone in thinking this. It was very flawed logic. And what you're seeing is you're starting to see a chunk of Notre Dame fans. And I don't know this guy's age, but I think you're definitely seeing it more in the younger generation, where they're kind of falling for the talking points. They're falling for the narratives. They're allowing themselves to kind of be bullied into this conversation of, well, you know, we can't make the playoff if this, or this happens. Well, look, now we know we can't lose 2 games in a season or we're going to be left out. Well, yeah, that's true this year. But do you think Notre Dame would have been left out last year with this schedule? When you look at the 3 lost teams they were going against, 3 lost teams that lost games in the regular season. And the answer is like, no, they wouldn't have. It's a unique year. If they would have had this record, the record they had last year, this year, then they're fine. And at the end of the day, it's like, look, Notre Dame still controls their own destiny, no matter how much people want to cry about they don't. And that's just the facts, because if Notre Dame handles their business on the field, they're going to be in the playoffs. And there's nothing the committee can do about it without it being so blatant that you now expose yourself to lawsuits, you know, for collusion. And so this idea that Notre Dame needs to join a conference, Trevor, is something we wanted to talk about. And so the title of the show is it time for Notre Dame to join a conference? Because that's the narrative that's going around. And in short, the answer is heck to the no. And we're going to explain why. But the first part of this is you've got to get out of your mind this notion that, you know, Notre Dame not being in a conference doesn't control their own destiny. Because forget the Notre Dame aspect of it for a minute. Do I want to remind you guys that Miami didn't play in a conference title game this year? I think they were like 4th or 5th, 3rd or 4th at best in their final conference standings. Can I remind you folks that that they're not, I mean, they're not, Ole Miss didn't play in a conference championship game. Why is Ole Miss in the playoffs? They handled their business. Texas A&M was in the college football playoffs, not playing a college football playoff game. BYU went from being independent to being in a conference. And what happened when they played in their conference title game? After being 11-1, 6 quality wins, multiple wins over ranked team. They had more quality wins than Miami, Notre Dame, or Alabama. And what happened to them when they lost their conference title game in a rematch? They got bumped out and sent to the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I mean, Florida State played in and won the ACC in 2023 and got bumped out of the playoffs. Miami went 10-2 in their conference last year, didn't make the conference title game. They didn't make the playoffs at 10-2. This notion that Notre Dame has to be in a conference is nonsense. And you say, okay, well, hold on there, Brian and Trevor, because them not being in a conference is why ESPN did this, and this. Very fair. But they screwed other conferences as well. So now you're saying not only does they have to join a conference, they have to join a conference that's affiliated with ESPN in order to not get screwed, like the Big 12 did this year and last year. You say whatever you want about Miami or Notre Dame or whatever, but there's no really debating that BYU didn't have a better resume than Miami. They did. They had more wins. They had fewer losses in the regular season. They had more wins over top 25 teams. They had no bad losses. They had no losses to unranked teams, and they had more quality wins, 2 more quality wins than Miami.
And played in their conference championship game.
Exactly. So how did that work out for BYU? BYU would have been better off being in the American Conference and dominating than joining a Power 5 league. I could go down and do this list all day of examples of how being in a conference did not benefit a team. You as Notre Dame fans who are starting to fall for this need to think about a second and say, why do they only focus on these limited examples of where it hurt someone for not being in a conference or whatever the case may be, or benefited someone being in a conference? Because every time you want to point to something like that, then I can point to an example of a team that got screwed because they were in a conference. Or I should say that got no benefit from being in a conference. BYU got no benefit when it came to the playoff for being in the conference. None. You could say their losses are better than Notre Dame's losses because they lost to the number 4 team twice. Notre Dame lost to 7-10. So this notion that they need to join a conference to be better suited to be in the playoffs is honestly a weak-minded argument. It just is. You're allowing yourself to get bullied into doing exactly what ESPN and the conferences want you to do. When in reality, there is no need to join a conference. And we'll talk about some of the other talking points in a minute, but I think I wanted to start off with that, in order to get into the playoffs nonsense. Notre Dame lost to a MAC team last year and hosted a playoff game.
Not as the 8th seed. But it's not like they barely got to host either. They
were the 5th ranked team.
Here's the thing that bothers me the most about a lot of these talking points that I hear from mostly Notre Dame fans, because I have accepted it enough that there's just going to be a population of people out there outside of the Notre Dame fan base that are just always the counter is always going to be whittled down to, no matter what, talking ball podcast you listen to, no matter what analyst you listen to, it's always going to go back to why isn't Notre Dame in a conference, which is a very, very shallow argument, one that I just don't really partake in. What bothers me is there is a small facet of Notre Dame fans who in the same sentence will give USC a hard time for joining the Big Ten and Lincoln Riley running off to USC because he thinks his path is clearer to make the playoffs in the Big Ten, not going to the SEC. The same Notre Dame fans that will give USC a hard time about that are the same fans saying Notre Dame should join a conference to make it an easier path to make the playoffs. That doesn't sit well with me. I don't understand that. I really don't. We have to get out of this mindset of, well, they play a insert Big Ten SEC schedule here. What does that mean anymore? These are conferences with 18 and 16
that
teams.
Used to mean something. It does not anymore.
They're not created equally anymore. Like Ole Miss is 7-1 in conference versus Georgia's 7-1 in conference looks a heck of a lot different. Ole Miss has 7 wins in conference. 5 of those teams were sub 500, not at 500, sub 500. And half of those weren't even close. No, they were like, 5-7. No, they were like 3-9, 4-8 teams. What are we talking about here? If Notre Dame played 5 teams on their schedule, sub 500, spread out over the course of the season, people would have a field day with that. Why don't people pay attention to that with teams like Ole Miss? It's because they're in the SEC. We got to get out of this. Conference schedules are hard. IU played 1 ranked opponent all throughout the regular season. 1. But why did they get some of the benefit? Well, they played in the Big Ten. It's like, what does that mean?
Right.
So now you want that same argument to be geared towards Notre Dame? You want Notre Dame to just join one of those times? Well, it'll make it easier to get into the playoffs. The argument that I had yesterday in this thread was Notre Dame did have the opportunity to control their own destiny. We said all the way back in July, in almost every buy-sell hold, in almost every free-for-all mailbag, and almost once a week in just a normal show, we said Notre Dame cannot go 0-2 in their first 2 games, or else it will be out of your control. Fundamentally, and I sound like a broken record saying this, every single team, all 136 teams at the FBS level, have the opportunity to handle business every single season. Notre Dame didn't do that. And then we all agreed that the night of the Texas A&M game, when we were all sitting down in the post-game show, just livid about the performance that was put on the field by one side of the football, we said that their playoff destiny is no longer in their control. Even if they win out, even if they win out 10 straight, you're still just at the mercy of the playoff committee. Now, fast forward to December 7th, the playoff committee made some really bad decisions. So I don't want to paint this picture like I have no idea where this mindset is coming from. Brian, I know you're not doing that either. We're just saying that this is the wrong mindset to have. This is the wrong counterpoint to have. You can't look at the situation that unfolded and say, well, the committee screwed us over and they're trying to pigeonhole Notre Dame into joining a conference, so I guess we might as well do it.
Yes, that's like such a loser mentality.
Wrong.
Oh, well, I guess this guy is going to bully me until I do whatever he wants. I might as well just do whatever he wants, as opposed to just punching him back in the face. Next time he comes up and smacks you in the face, you smack him back harder. You know, so this notion that Notre Dame has to join a league is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And I was happy to hear Pete Bavacqua say in his press conference that this only strengthens it. And you know, like the other part of it too, Trevor, is this scheduling notion. I think that's the other weak part of it too, is we keep hearing from losers like Dan Wolken and other people like that say, well, the commissioners are trying to box out Notre Dame. You might not want to tell people that if that actually is happening, because, you know, I mean, in this litigious era of college sports that we're in, you might not want to tell Notre Dame, hey, we're purposely trying to collude together to screw you over and hurt you financially. Probably not a good idea. The second thing about this is, in the last 7 months, while these commissioners are boxing Notre Dame out, we have seen Notre Dame sign a 12-year contract with Clemson, a home and home with Auburn, and a home and home with BYU that was announced like 50 seconds after Notre Dame and USC announced they weren't playing. This notion that, and again, it gets into too many of you that have this mindset are listening to the few whiners and the clickbait stuff that ESPN just puts out nonstop and not actually thinking about this critically. So maybe Texas won't play Notre Dame in the future. Maybe they'll back out of the series that they play in the future, because Steve Sarkisian has a loser's mindset that says, well, what's the advantage of playing tough games? Well, here's a thought. I don't know. You get better as a team. Maybe you win those games. Like, notice it's like two former, you know, it's a current and a former USC coach that are ones saying this the loudest, right? I mean, like, goodness gracious, stop being soft, people. With this notion that, well, we're just going to schedule to get into the playoffs. Okay, you may get into the playoffs, but what happens when you get there? Indiana's scheduled to get to the playoffs in 2024. How'd that work out? They got exposed as soon as they got there. This year, Indiana did scheduled again. Maybe this year it works out better for them. I think it will. But it's not because the schedule, it's because the quality of their team. And if you have like if Indiana would have played a tougher schedule, I think they'd still be in the playoffs. Maybe they got one loss, but they would have still been in the playoffs because they beat the number 3 team in the Big Ten on the road by 10 in the one good team that they played. Would their record be that much different if they also had to play like a game at home against USC and a game at Michigan this year? Would their record be any different? No, they'd probably still be 12-0. At worst, 11-1. And guess what? They're still in the playoffs. You know, so this loser mentality that people like Steve Sarkisian have about, oh, well, we lost. No, you didn't get left out because you lost to Ohio State. You got left out because you got dominated by a 4-8 Florida team. That's why you got left out. And this crybaby stuff drives me nuts. But let's talk about this practically. So say a team like Texas won't play anymore. A team like USC won't play you anymore. What happened when USC punked out and decided they didn't want to play Notre Dame anymore? What happened? Within a minute, Notre Dame and BYU had announced the schedule, which means they had been talking this entire time to set it up. Because Notre Dame they're not fools, and they're not going to sit there and just allow themselves to be dominated like this. So BYU is going to say, hey, we'll play Notre Dame because we understand the value of playing Notre Dame. It helps us. If we win, it helps improve our resume. If we play in a close game and then we have a close loss, it helps our resume. It also brings exposure and money into the program in an era where we need to make as much money as possible. So for every Texas, there's going to be a Kentucky or a Vanderbilt. Could you imagine Clark Lee being like, nah, we don't want to play Notre Dame. We want to make as soft a schedule as possible. Could you imagine Clark Lee saying that? I don't think we'll ever hear Clark Lee say that. Auburn was like, hey, we'll play you. Florida's like, hey, we'll play you. There's plenty of teams that understand what that means. And there's plenty of teams like Georgia that will say, hey, we're Georgia. We'll still play you. We may say, hey, look, we want to do it in Atlanta and, in a neutral field. Okay, fine, but they still play you. And this notion that they're not going to be able to get teams to play them is nonsense. The notion that they can't get good teams to play them late in the year, that might be valid. It's going to be tougher to get non-ACC teams to play you late in the year. There may be some truth to that, but so what? What good team then they play in 2024? The two ranked teams they played were Navy and Army, and they still got in the playoffs as the number 5th ranked team. Now, they were the 7th seed because in 2024, for those that may have forgotten, the 4 highest ranked conference champions all got byes. So 2 teams ranked below them, Boise and Arizona State, jumped ahead of them and bumped them down to 7. Like Ohio State was 6, it bumped them down to 8. Tennessee was 7, bumped them down to 9, for example. And Notre Dame still made the playoffs with no Power 5 ranked wins in October or November. Think about that. The number of ranked teams that Notre Dame beat in October and November of 2024 was ranked Power 4 teams that Notre Dame beat in 24 and 25 was what? 0. Why'd they get in? Because they went down to Texas A&M in the opening game of the season and handled their business. Because when they played Louisville in week 5, they handled their business and they went 11-1 and they made it in as the 5th ranked team. In other years, they may have been that team may have been 7th. That team may have been 8th because of the loss and because there was other, like this year, maybe Notre Dame isn't 5th with last year's resume. Maybe they're 7th because there was more 0-1 loss teams. Maybe they'd have been behind Ole Miss and Oregon and Texas Tech because of the fact that they didn't have a lot of great wins. Then I accept that because that's unfortunately for you how the thing shaped out. You couldn't know that Florida State was going to suck because the year before Florida State was 13-1. You couldn't know that they're going to go 10-2 the year that you played them. A&M was supposed to be a good football team in 24, and they started off that way and then folded down the stretch. That kind of thing is beyond your control. You can't control that Stanford was a guaranteed ranked opponent every year for a decade, and now they're not. Those are things outside your control. What's not outside your control is you handling your business on the football field, which Notre Dame did in 2024 and did not in 2025. Because here's the reality of all of this crying from Notre Dame side and other side and all these other type of things. If Notre Dame would have just won one of their first 2 games, they're in the playoffs. I don't care that they happened in September. Win one of them. Those 2 teams had to play tough games in September too because they had to play Notre Dame. Handle your business. And then I don't care who you beat in October, November. Doesn't matter. Do you still try to play some of those teams? Sure. But let's not forget that Auburn literally a month ago agreed to play Notre Dame in October. I think late October, if I remember correctly. Was it the 26th? Let me look up that game between Auburn. So they're playing at home and it's October 28th. They're playing the home game for Notre Dame is in September, and then the road game is against Auburn. I also want to remind people that in 2027 on November 13th, Notre Dame plays at Clemson. In 2029, Notre Dame plays at Florida State on November 10th. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities. In 2031, in November, they play Florida at home. So there are plenty of teams that have and will continue to be willing to schedule Notre Dame. Next year, Notre Dame plays Miami. So as long as the ACC still exists, there are opportunities to play ranked teams in November. It's just you need those ACC teams to handle business. Well, that's true of anybody you schedule. Like let's say you would have scheduled a home and home with Ohio State in November, and you're thinking, well, we're going to get that ranked win against Ohio State in November. And let's say that would have been scheduled in 2011 and 2012. You go into that 2011 season, the Buckeyes have been really good for years, and lo and behold, all this drama happens. Jim Tressel gets fired, Luke Fickell takes over, and the Buckeyes are unranked in a 6-loss team. You can't control what the other teams do. You can control what you do. Okay, so top teams won't play Notre Dame. Then go 12-0 every year, dominate everybody, and you're still in the playoffs. But this notion that teams aren't going to play Notre Dame is not backed by reality. It's only backed by people's opinions. And people have been saying this for years. Nobody's going to play Notre Dame. Nobody wants to play Notre Dame. And yet teams still continue to sign up to play Notre Dame. Imagine that. Now, some of these games were signed a while ago. The Alabama game was signed a while ago. The Florida game within the last few years. But as I said, in the last 7 months, Clemson, Auburn, and BYU have all agreed to play Notre Dame knowing the current landscape of college football. While USC was looking for every excuse in the world not to play Notre Dame, BYU was like, yes, bring it on. We'll play you. Absolutely. We'll go to your place. All we ask of you is you come to ours. That's fair. So I think there's too many people arguing about their feelings and trying to pass off their feelings with what's reality. And unfortunately, there's too many Notre Dame fans. And if this doesn't apply to you, then I'm clearly not talking to you. But for those who do feel this way, you've got to stop allowing outsiders who don't have your best interest to tell you what to do. If you own a business and your biggest competitor came over to your office and said, hey man, here's what I think you should do to really take your business to the next level. Would you believe he actually has your best interest in heart? Or would you think, what's his agenda? I'm his biggest competitor. I'm taking money out of his pocket. Am I to believe that he's coming over here giving me this advice that I think is a little sketchy, that goes against everything that our business has been about since I founded it? That he has our best interest in heart? No, I don't. I'd say this guy's got an agenda. So when I hear ESPN say Notre Dame needs to join a conference, well, what do you want them to do? What do you think they're going to do? They know that Notre Dame is contractually obligated to join what league? There's only one league Notre Dame can legally join if they decided to join a conference right now. And what league is that, Trevor?
The ACC.
And who does the ACC have a TV contract with?
ESPN.
So you don't think that it's a dying brand. The ACC is a dying brand. You don't think that they aren't smart enough to know that if Notre Dame joined the ACC, it skyrockets? They know what the numbers are in games that Notre Dame plays against ACC teams compared to everybody else. They know that viewership is way higher when Notre Dame plays an ACC team than when that team plays anybody else in the ACC or out of conference. They know that. And you don't think they want to add 4 more games a year of that to their broadcast? Do you think this is a football argument or is this a money argument? It's a money argument. That's all it is. It's not fairness. It's not about how Notre Dame's got to prove themselves or Notre Dame's got to put a real schedule together. Because, look, there are years where Notre Dame's schedule is going to be softer. Next year's doesn't, at least for now, doesn't look like a gauntlet. I think it's harder than what people are making it out to be. But it's not a gauntlet by any stretch of the imagination. But that's irrelevant because I could point to, and I'll still say, it's still tougher than what Indiana played the last 2 years. So you can miss me with that. It's still every bit as hard, if not tougher, than what Ohio State played this year. Is that Ohio State's fault? No. It's not Ohio State's fault that Penn State sucked this year. It's not Ohio State's fault that Michigan had a coach who's a psycho and wasn't really running the team anymore. That's not Ohio State's fault. It's not Ohio State's fault that Texas is overrated this year. They tried to schedule tougher. It didn't work out. But like even now, Notre Dame's 26 schedule is a word I won't repeat. Again, you're falling for the same bullcrap that you're saying that Notre Dame's schedule is in 2026. Why is it tougher? Why is it a bad schedule? Because you're being told that. Their schedule next year has one playoff team on it and another team that they got to go on the road to that had a shot to get to the playoffs if they would have just won their last game. And I'm supposed to be convinced that it's a terrible schedule. No, you're being told that. Is it a gauntlet? No. I can point to SEC teams that will play schedules as soft as what Notre Dame's appears to be. I can point to Big Ten teams that are going to be playing schedules as soft as what Notre Dame's appears to be. And you can tell me all you want about how tough USC schedule is in 2026. It isn't that tough in 2027 outside of 2 games. And if they lose both of those 2 games and would have beat Notre Dame, they'd still be in the playoffs. And if you can't win those 2 games and you can't beat Notre Dame, you don't belong in the playoffs. So too many Notre Dame fans are buying into this narrative. And it's like, why do you need the national media to hammer Notre Dame when you've got Notre Dame fans, some in our own chat, doing the work for them? And that's the problem, is there's too many Notre Dame fans that allow themselves to kind of be, they want to just, I don't know if they just want to go with the flow. I don't know if they buy into the faulty reasoning. Sometimes they may genuinely believe that. I think you're wrong. And I think all the reasons for it are nonsense. I want to remind you all again, Notre Dame tried to join a conference 3 times. 3 times. And were rejected all 3 times. And then they go build themselves up into a program that they don't need to be in a conference. And now you want to let those conferences that would not let you in force you to come in? What kind of lazy loser mindset is that? I can't deal with people like that. I can't accept that. It's soft. Like, that's an argument Lincoln Riley would make. Who's the softest coach in the Power 5 level? So the leagues that wouldn't let you in for 50, 60 years, force you to become what you are, now get to dictate to you that it's time for you to join a league whether you want to or not? Are you serious? In America, that's the mindset people have in this country? Really? That we're talking about sports? Really? Like, you're going to allow that in a sport that's supposed to be about competition, striving to be the best? You're just going to let other people tell you what to do? No, we tried to be a part of what you were doing, and you wouldn't let us in. And yet all these lame reasons why. And I've heard Michigan people say, well, look at Notre Dame backing out of Michigan. Do you know why Notre Dame did that against Michigan? Do you know why Jack Swarbrick handed Michigan a letter? Do you know why? Do you remember what happened when Michigan dropped Notre Dame? They did it the day before the game. They canceled the game a day before and then wouldn't play Notre Dame for decades. That's called payback. So don't be like, well, no, Notre Dame did this. No, know your history. Know why they did that before you start crying about what Notre Dame is going to do. Know your history. Know why they did it instead of just believing what the talking heads at ESPN said it. And that's what I'm tired of, Trev.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, look, the pushback that I always give people when they say that, Notre Dame schedules this, Notre Dame schedules that, it's like, okay, let's play this out. Let's grant that premise is true, even though I don't believe it. Let's grant it is true. Who do you replace it with? What do you want their schedule to look like? Week 1, Ohio State. Week 2, Texas. Week 3, Bama. Week 4, right, Georgia. Week 5, Michigan. Week 6, USC. Week 7, Florida down in the swamp, barring that they have a better season. Week 8, you're out against Oregon and Autzen. And, week 9, you're at Washington. Like, who else's schedule looks like that? It's a very short answer. It's nobody. So that's always my question. If you want, always back it with, if you can't just sit there and say Notre Dame schedule's weak. It's like, okay, who should they replace it with? Well, better teams than this. Okay, who? Who should those teams be? What do you want that to look like? The other thing with Notre Dame schedules, we got to get out of this conversation with the logos on the helmets and the names on the jerseys. We got to get out of that. That's the biggest thing that I see back in conferences. And I hear analysts talk about it. I hear conversations on the board about it. I see it on Twitter. I have those conversations in my personal life. It's like, hey, who'd you beat? It's like, dude, we beat Iowa at Iowa. It's like, what the heck does that mean?
Right.
That tells me you scored 17 points. That's what that tells me. Dude, we played Nebraska at Nebraska. It's like, and what does that mean? A team that has to beat a ranked team in a decade? Yeah, but dude, they were so good 30 years ago. I don't care. We got to get out of this mindset. Dude, we played Florida in the swamp. You mean a 4-8 team?
Right.
But it's the swamp. And we played Penn State in a whiteout. Cool, they're 500 in whiteout games. We got to get out of this mindset. We have to look at these teams and these programs for what they are. We also can't use what teams are now and project that into future schedules. It's another debate that I've had. It's like, well, so-and-so was garbage this year. It's like, so they're going to be garbage in 2028? If I'm Oregon, and let's say that my schedule for 2025 came out and I was like, oh, shoot, I host IU in October, being Oregon in 2020, dub. Now, I'm using the extreme of IU. Not every single team is going to go from being perennially the worst team in all of college football to one of the best in the country. I understand that. But we also, in this world of the transfer portal and NIL and the coaching carousel going absolutely crazy, teams are on the border of doing this every single season. Every year, one way or another. Notre Dame has Arkansas on their schedule in a few years. I seriously doubt they go 2-10. I could be wrong. I just don't see them repeating a 2-10 performance. Florida State, for as bad as they were this year, over doubled the amount of victories that they had last year. So they would Arkansas won't be 2-10 in 2028 whenever they play them, 28 or 29. We've got to get out of this mindset of paying attention to the logo on the helmet and the names on the jerseys and get away from, well, dude, that's a hard place to play in CFB 26. Notre Dame should go play there. We got to get out of these mindsets, guys, because it's pointless. It's pointless. No team, no conferences, by and large, have teams that have schedules that are that much of gauntlets. I would argue that the teams that do play those gauntlet schedules are the lesser teams in the league. Go look at what Wisconsin's done. Why does the Big Ten do that and have them play Oregon and Ohio State and Michigan and USC and Alabama out of conference in the same year? It's because they know that Wisconsin's not a playoff contender, so they're not trying to fight for one of the spots. Like that's the stuff that bothers me. That's what really bothers me when talking about Notre Dame's schedule, because nobody can ever back it with who they should replace it with. And they never point to another playoff contending team that is playing that level of a schedule. They just look at Notre Dame's schedule in a vacuum, and I just don't think that's fair.
No, and the problem is there's too many Notre Dame fans that make that argument for them. And that's what frustrates me. Has Notre Dame and here's the thing. I have criticized Notre Dame in the past under Brian Kelly, where I felt like Jack Swarbrick was purposely giving Notre Dame easier schedules. I've argued this before. I don't agree with that. We talked about during the 2021 season. Now, I don't think Jack Swarbrick intended the 2021 season to be as soft as it was. You know, you don't play at Florida State and think it's going to be a bad game. Because when it was scheduled, that was not when that schedule was put together. I think it was like a year after Florida State had won the title. I mean, but after that, it was Wisconsin in a neutral field. It was USC at home. It was Cincinnati at home. You didn't know that Cincinnati was going to be as good as they were when you scheduled that game. And so it's like there was a time when Notre Dame, and we criticized them for that. You don't intentionally put together a soft schedule, but you also have to be smart. Like, so if I'm putting together a schedule in 2013, I got to think like, dude, I got USC on my schedule. I got Stanford on my schedule. You know, I've got Florida. We're joining a league that's got Florida State and Clemson and Louisville. All these teams that at the time were really good. This is part of the problem. And one of the mailbag questions that we didn't get to on Friday was somebody asking, like, should teams be able to schedule 10 years in advance? And my answer is no, you shouldn't. I think you shouldn't be scheduling any more than 5 years in advance. And for this very reason, like right now, you think of playing Alabama in 2029 is going to be very tough. I don't know that. So, I mean, the chat's like, well, Clemson, you're going to get Clemson when they're down. You don't know that. You have no clue. Clemson's down this year. That's like me saying, well, if LSU's on the schedule in 5 years, they're going to suck. Well, what makes you say that? Because they suck right now. Well, you don't know that. You don't know that, A, Dabo's not going to turn it around, or B, Dabo retires, somebody comes in and replaces them and gets them going, because most of that schedule won't be against Dabo. Because even if Dabo turns around the next 3 or 4 years, that's actually probably expedites his departure from Clemson. You don't know what the next coach is going to do, just like you don't know what Notre Dame's going to be in 5 or 6, 7 years. I have no clue who Notre Dame's coach is going to be when Notre Dame plays Alabama or Texas in 28, 29, 30 years like that. I have no clue. I don't think it'll be Marcus Freeman. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think it will be. And I don't know that we know who the coach for those teams are. So that's why I say you have to, I think you do need to change there needs to be some sort of rule that says, look, you can't schedule more than 5 years in advance unless it's a rival. If Notre Dame and USC change courses, hey, look, man, here's what we're going to do. We're going to schedule a new 20-year deal for the end of the season every year. All right, cool. You can do that. If Georgia and Georgia Tech want to sign a 20-year contract, they can do that. Outside of a established rival, I don't think you should be scheduling more than 5, 6 years in advance. And the problem is because you wind up with what's happened with Notre Dame, where people point to and say, oh, the schedule's soft, the schedule's soft, the schedule's soft. And I'm like, well, how soft would this schedule would have looked if we were talking about 10 years ago when Wisconsin was playing in the Big Ten title game, or when Michigan State was a really good team? Because 10 years ago, Michigan State was coming off of a playoff appearance. I mean, they were pretty good. Purdue stinks now. 3 years ago, 3 years ago, they were playing in the Big Ten championship game. North Carolina is not far removed from playing in the ACC championship with Drake May. Miami's a playoff team now. I don't know that they're going to be good next year. I think that they will, but I don't know. If you'd have told me 4 years ago, Notre Dame's got SMU on the screen, I'm like, that's a W. Now I'm like, that's going to be a tough game. 10 years ago, you'd have been like, man, 10 years ago, you'd have been like, you've got to play Wisconsin, Michigan State, Miami, and Stanford? Are you serious? Like, what's Notre Dame? Do they hate Marcus Freeman? Are they, are they trying to give him this brutal schedule? Because those teams are all really flipping good. Now they all stink. You have no idea what they're going to be. And honestly, the way that the portal is now, we have no idea what teams are going to be from year to year. Because do you think anybody that had Indiana on their schedule last year was thinking that's going to be a tough one? No. Things can change quickly. But bigger picture, Trevor, this notion that Notre Dame needs to join a conference to schedule well is an emotional argument, not one rooted in facts. And if the only evidence you have of Notre Dame being iced out is Dan freaking Wolken, then you are backing the wrong horse. You know what I mean? Like you're playing roulette and you're putting money on green. You know what I mean? Or purple, or better yet, orange. Bro, you're picking a loser. Because the evidence that I can go by is in the last 7 months, Notre Dame signed a 12-year deal with Clemson, a home and home with Auburn, and a home and home with BYU. They signed the home and home with BYU after he wrote that stupid article. After the commissioner of that league said, tried to go at Notre Dame. Because why did BYU not listen to their commissioner? Because they know what's going to happen when they play Notre Dame. We get a really good team on our resume. And if we beat them, we're going to have a great shot to be in the playoffs. If we lose to them, as long as we're competitive, it boosts our resume. But more importantly, in this era of money, do you know how much moolah is going to come into our program next year when Notre freaking Dame, a top 10 team, comes out to Provo? Do you know how much tickets are going to cost for that game? Do you know how much hotels are going to be going for that weekend? Are you serious? Of course we're going to play Notre Dame because we're not masochists. We're not suicidal. We're not morons. Of course we're going to schedule Notre Dame. Auburn scheduled Notre Dame in November. This November. So what evidence other than your feelings or an article by a hack who doesn't even know things being reported by the network he works for do you have that Notre Dame's being iced out? Well, look what the Big 12 commissioner said. Well, look what the second best team in the Big 12 did after the commissioner said that. They scheduled Notre Dame in a home and home. So no, Notre Dame doesn't need to join a conference.
Well said. I agree 100%, man. I absolutely agree 100%. Folks, that is going to do it.
No. We wanted to go through part 2 is going to be what should Notre Dame's scheduling philosophy be moving forward. I want to go through that. So, Beezer, you won your bet.
Well, good deal. Well, let's go through what Notre Dame's projected schedule should be.
The thing we talked about before the show, Trev, was like, okay, who should Notre Dame be looking to play and what should their scheduling philosophy be?
Sure.
And I think that if you look at what Pete Babakwa said at that press conference, Trev, and you and I talked about this on the phone afterwards, everybody was like, well, there wasn't anything in the press conference. And you and I sat there and did a show afterwards, like, actually, there weren't the things we were hoping to hear in the press conference. We wanted to hear about an extension for Marcus Freeman. We wanted to hear that they're, giving a big middle finger to the ACC and all that type of stuff. But there were some very good nuggets in there. And the biggest one being somebody asked him, what commissioners have you talked to? And he said the only commissioner he's talked to is who? Greg Sankey. What the SEC just announced that they're going to 9 conference games. What was written into their bylaws? You have to play at least one Power 4 team or Notre Dame in your non-conference. Well, what is Greg Sankey advocating for? Not having a bunch of automatic bids. What is Tony Petitti arguing for? A bunch of freaking automatic bids. What is Pete Babakwa advocating for? Not a lot of automatic bids. So I think Greg Sankey understands something that some of his coaches do not, which is, hey, guys, putting a good product on the field isn't just about winning games. It's about playing good teams and proving yourself. That's a big part of this. That's why you see the SEC going to a 9th game. That means a lot more in the SEC than it does the Big Ten. We can argue which conference is better, but the one thing you can't argue is which one is deeper. That's not an argument. Yeah. I think the top of the Big Ten is better than the top of the SEC right now. And we'll find out if that's true this weekend or this week, right? Tomorrow and Thursday. But what you can argue, in my opinion, is which league is deeper. That's not debatable. I don't even think the Big Ten is the second deepest league in college football. I think that's the Big 12. I think you could argue the Big Ten has the best 4 of any team in college football. Certainly the best 3, in my opinion. I mean, 3 of the top 5 ranked teams in the playoff seeding. But I don't think you can argue that they're deeper, anywhere close to deeper than the Big Ten. So, Trev, when I look at this, I think that what you're seeing now is you're going to see some SEC teams kind of follow the lead of the commissioner and say, hey, let's be willing to schedule Notre Dame more. Because the one thing that you can say about the SEC is there's a lot of things I don't like about the SEC, but they know how to make money. And they understand the value of those type of games. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. You see as you see the Big Ten try to punk out of playing any tough non-conference games, you see the second best team in the Big 12 say, we'll play you. We'll play you. So I think that is smart and speaks to what I think is going to be more of a consistent relationship in the future with the SEC. And I do think that's important in Notre Dame because as we talk about what should a Notre Dame schedule look like, I would like to get to an era where there's at least one SEC team on your schedule every year. Some years it can be Georgia, some years it can be Kentucky, and some years it's somebody in between. But when I look at Notre Dame's schedule in recent seasons, and they've had to play, Georgia and home, they've played Texas A&M and homes. I think there's value to that for Notre Dame and for those teams. I do think there's value to that. When I look in the future and I look at 2028, and you're like, there's 3 SEC teams on your schedule. There were 2 this year. You can make your case like, look, here's how we stack up against the SEC. Look, we were making that argument this year. Well, look, we played Arkansas. Yeah, they were bad. They lost every game in their league. But guys, look at look at those 8, and then what they did against Notre Dame. And one of these does not look like the others. You know what I mean? You have that. So I think one thing moving forward is from 27 to 2030, there's at least one SEC team on their schedule every year. In 2027, Trev, that team is Auburn. And in 2028, they play 3 SEC teams, Texas, Arkansas, and Auburn. In 29, they play 2, Alabama and Texas. And then in 2030, they play in 2030, they play 1 as well. That's going to be when they go back to Alabama. They don't play any SEC. Actually, in 2031, they play Florida. And then in 2032, they play Florida as well. So actually, from 27 to 32, there's at least one SEC team on the schedule every year. I think that should remain, and I would actually like to see 2. Now, do I think they should have Texas and Oklahoma and Alabama on the schedule in a year? Depends on what the rest of the schedule looks like. I don't think you need that, but I'm also not afraid of that because there's going to be teams in the SEC trying to get to the playoffs that have to play Texas and Alabama. That's part of the deal sometimes. More strategy is at least 1 every year. Try to get 2, and if you're going to play 2, you want one of them to be at least someone that's perceived to be a top half of the league team. Whether it's Bama, Texas, a team like that, or it can be A&M again, it can be LSU, it can be Florida, and maybe that team ends up not being good, but there's at least an intent to say, hey, look, we're gonna play that second team. I think that's something that at the beginning of, if I'm putting together a schedule for Notre Dame, that I'm going to try to do in the future. Thoughts
I
on
like
that
that
part first?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I have my overall thoughts of like just what an ideal schedule would be, but as far as conferences go, yeah, I think an SEC team should be on it every single season.
Yeah, and that's kind of where my philosophy came from, is looking to try to get X number of teams from certain conferences every year on your schedule as much as you can, and that's part of it. But you can dive into yours if you want. Go ahead and lay yours out, and we'll chat about it.
Yeah, so this is just big picture. This is what I want for Notre Dame's schedule moving forward. I would prefer one, especially now with USC leaving the schedule, Notre Dame needs some sort of marquee matchup in the fourth quarter, or like the final window, if you want to call it, of the regular season. Now, when I mean a marquee matchup, I am talking about the names that I was talking about earlier, because perception does matter. Now, Notre Dame, contrary to what we talked about in the first, or what falls in line with what we talked about in the first part of today's show, Notre Dame doesn't have to join a conference to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think with how the committee is doing things, you do need some sort of marquee game on your schedule in the later window, ideally in the month of November. You kind of had that this year with Pitt, but the voters really didn't even take Pitt as a serious contender. I mean, they were 7-2 at one point and still not ranked.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking a brand, more of a brand bias. I mean, think about this. For all the flack that Notre Dame got for their schedule in 2025, not that many people push back on the fact that Arkansas was 2-10. Why? Because they played in the SEC. It was Arkansas. They played them down in Fayetteville. All the flack for Notre Dame's schedule, like, dude, you played Syracuse, played Navy again. It's like teams that don't have that brand power.
Right.
So that's all I want in Q4. One of those teams. It could be any one of those teams. I mean, look, when they play Auburn, do I think Auburn in a couple years is going to be 11-0 when they play Notre Dame? No, I don't. Could they be? Maybe.
Sure.
Like that's
made a good hire this possibility.
Yeah,
made a good hire.
Absolutely.
They got a better head coach now than the one they just fired.
Oh yeah. But am I putting all my chips in the center of the table to say that they're going to be that? No, I'm not. I want Notre Dame in at least the final window of the regular season in the month of November to have a marquee name on the schedule. Because fact of the matter is Syracuse just doesn't have that same pull. Syracuse could be 5-7 and Auburn could be 5-7. Notre Dame, people will talk about Notre Dame having a good win over a scrappy Auburn team versus what they do against Syracuse. That's just the facts of the matter of what the committee will look at. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that's a way that Notre Dame can get something like that on their schedule without joining a conference to have that.
I think along those lines, Trevor, I think one thing that could maybe help is if there's a way, as much as you can, to try to get Clemson in October, November. And there's some years that's going to happen, and other years there's not. So, for example, the rivalry starts in 2027. And that first game is going to be November 13th. So the first 3 games of November are already scheduled that year. They play Virginia Tech on the 6th, at Clemson on the 13th, home against Navy. That could end up being, like right now, if you looked at that 3-game schedule, you're like, dude, the best team they're going to play is Navy. That may not be the case in 2 years, though, especially with James Franklin being hired at Virginia Tech. That could end up being 3 straight top 25 games. And so I think that's something that would help as well. It's going to be real tough. And the thing about the toughness, it's not even the Notre Dame part that's hard. The opponent part that's hard. Notre Dame's going to have a lot of ACC teams on their schedule in October and November. That's just and starting in 2027 until the contract ends, they're playing 6 ACC teams a year now because they've already got the 5 that's part of the ACC deal, but then they play Clemson. And I do think there might be a couple years. So that's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in 2027, they only play 5. In 2028, I think they only play 5 because the Clemson was supposed to already going to be on their schedule. No, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there's 5 in 2028. But beginning in 2026, there's 6 on their schedule every year because they weren't expecting that. Clemson wasn't on their schedule, going to be on their schedule for a while. So starting in 2029, I should say, they're going to have 6 every year until the contract is over, which is going to make it a little bit tougher to get some of those teams in November. From a Notre Dame standpoint, much less there. So I think that's why as you work these schedules out with Clemson, if as often as they're willing, try to get those games in October and November. That's kind of what I think it would be smart and as best as you can. I think speaking of November, they also have to figure something out with the end of their season. I don't know really what the options are, but I mean, you could just go with a random team at the end of your year every year. I mean, that's part of it. I would prefer to figure out some way, shape, form, or fashion to have some sort of rivalry in that last game of the year, if you can, if it's at all possible. And that's what's so frustrating about the USC situation, because that should be their end of the season game every year. So when I look at it, Trev, I think if you've got 4 conferences, and every year you've got to try to get one of the good teams from those leagues in November. It's going to be a challenge, but it's something that, to your point, I think is something you should try to do. I agree with you. Whether it's Clemson, whether it's, trying to get, some of those games are already set, like obviously the Bama game is going to be in September both years. The Texas games are in September both years. That's just the reality of it. The Clemson game in 2032 is in September, but the 2031 game against Florida, I said Clemson, I meant Florida. The 2031 game against Florida is going to be in November, assuming those games continue. And look, guys, I understand some of those teams may try to get out of those games. They may not. I don't know. We haven't heard that yet. And if they try to get out, it'll be as we get closer to that time. But that's Florida. You've got Florida in November in 2031. So I agree, Trev, it is good. And it's not so much that I think Notre Dame has to prove anything in November. I just think it's good to get tested in November as you get ready for the playoffs. Last year you can complain, you can say whatever you want about Notre Dame didn't play anybody good in November, but they played a talented USC team in November. They weren't a good team, but they were at least talented. And they played 2 ranked G5 teams that were good football teams. Notre Dame was far superior than them, clearly, but they were still games that required preparation. They required focus. And then you also had Florida State on the schedule, which in some years is going to be a good opponent to have in November. So I do think there's an attempt by Notre Dame, at least it appears to me, to try and do something in November. I'm curious what they're going to do now, because circumstances have changed in recent weeks. Because every other year, you felt like we at least had one game that we think has a chance to be pretty good in November. Every other year, that's when you go out to LA. Now, obviously, they haven't been good recently, but when you schedule that, you're thinking there's a chance they're going to be good. And that's going to make it a little bit challenging, Trev, but you don't have that anymore. But I do think that there needs to be something like that. As I look at it, Trev, once you get into the 6-game schedule, I think what Notre Dame needs to try to do every year is you've got your 6 ACC teams. Every year you need to play 1 to 2 SEC teams, 1 to 2 Big Ten teams, 0 to 1 Big 12 team, and then 2 G5 teams. I would like for Notre Dame to take we're going to play 10 Power 4 games moving forward. I do think that's important for Notre Dame to do. as teams like the SEC say, we're going to a 9-game schedule, plus we're demanding all of our teams play one Power Four, that Notre Dame should respond by saying, hey, we're going to try to schedule 10 Power Four games every year as well and match that. Because what you don't want to have, and because it would be a legitimate argument against Notre Dame, is hold on a second. The Big Ten is demanding 10 Power Four games. The SEC is demanding 10 Power Four games. The ACC is demanding 10 Power Four games. You're only playing 9. That's where you can start to get into the, okay, now you have an unfair advantage, Notre Dame, that you're scheduling softer. So unless that third G5 team is going to be like a Boise of past years, which you can't guarantee, I do think playing 10 makes sense. So you get Navy and then one other G5, and it could be Bowling Green for all I care. I don't care. It could, and I prefer that it be someone terrible, because you do need some cupcakes on your schedule, and everybody has them. Georgia played Charlotte this year. Alabama played, who was it?
Auburn
played
Louisiana Monroe.
They had 2. They played Louisiana Monroe and then Eastern Illinois, an FCS team. So yeah, I'm fine with that. But I do think one thing that I think Notre Dame should do is try to get 10 Power 4 teams every year.
Yeah, my biggest thing with the G5 is I just don't want to have a repeat of 2024. Now, mind you, they were the 5th-ranked team and the 7th seed in the playoffs. The years of playing 4 G5 teams in a year just have to be gone.
Yeah,
you can't play Northern Illinois and Miami of Ohio and Army and Navy. And I want the Navy rivalry to stay forever.
And I want to respond to something here real quick. Agree, 100%. So Andrew Gilmore says, what about 11 Power 4 games to make up for no conference championships? That's utter nonsense, because only 2 teams from each league is playing in a conference championship game. So now you're putting yourself at an unfair disadvantage against a lot more teams than you'll be going against. So there's 8 teams that play in the conference championship. Not all of them are going to make the playoffs, BYU. But now you're unnecessarily disadvantaging yourself against Texas A&M this year, Miami this year, and Oregon this year. Why? This is the whole point, Andrew. You don't have to prove that to anyone else, because here's my thing is, okay, cool. They'll do that when every other conference says we will no longer play FCS opponents. Because for a lot of these teams, like Alabama, like Georgia, actually Georgia didn't play an FCS team this year, did they? A lot of years they do, but for Alabama, it took the SEC title game for them to play as many FBS teams as Notre Dame played. It took that game for them to have as many Power 4 games as what Notre Dame played. Now, in the future, that'll be a little bit different. Austin Peay, that's right. Georgia played Austin Peay and Charlotte. So now Notre Dame's got to play 11 Power 4 games. They don't need that extra data point. That's the whole point. That's you buying into the narrative being spun by ESPN. That's not real. That's not a real data point, because those teams they were playing 4 non-conference games. Usually 3 of them were not Power 4 teams. It was very rare that was happening. Alabama this year played Eastern Illinois, Louisiana Monroe, Wisconsin, and then Florida State. So, I mean, why do I have to feel that Notre Dame has to play an 11th Power 4 game? This is the whole point we're pushing back against, Trevor, is stop allowing the narratives that are – because here's the thing. If you schedule 11 Power 4 games, they're still going to find something to cry about. They're still going to cry about you don't play in a conference championship. They're still going to cry about, oh, well, you only played X number of Power 4 teams with a winning record. Notre Dame played the same number of Power 4 teams this year as almost everybody in the country. And we're more dominant against those teams against everybody. They're going to find something to cry about. So don't put yourself in a position where you're hurting yourself to try to prove something to somebody that's always going to find fault with you until you do what they say. Just join the league. But I do think that Notre Dame should dictate in the future that as teams go to 9+1, meaning leagues are demanding you have to play 9 regular season games. Does the Big Ten have that same rule?
That you have to play 9 Power 4 teams or 9 conference
9
games?
plus 1. So the Big Ten already plays 9 conference games. Do you know if they have a rule where they have to play a Power 4 team as a
I don't
part?
know if they
I know
have the
the
plus
SEC and
one.
the ACC did that.
Yeah, I don't know if the Big Ten has the plus one.
I don't, because like Indiana didn't play a Power 4 team this year, did they?
No, they started their schedule against
Like Old Dominion.
Well, and I know Penn State didn't. I mean, Penn State started against Florida
right.
Atlantic, Villanova, and
That's right.
somebody else.
That's right. And Indiana played Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State this year. So the Big Ten, so I do that. Now the Big Ten looks like the cowards, but like ACC's moving to that. I believe they have a 9 plus 1. The SEC created a 9 plus 1. And that's the standard that Notre Dame should follow. We're going to play 9 plus 1. Because now you can point to the Big Ten teams. Hold on a second. Indiana, I don't care. I don't want to hear from Kurt Cignetti or Ryan Day or Kyle Whittingham or anybody else that's going to cry about us not playing a conference championship game, because you guys are all playing FBS or FCS teams in your non-conference. You need that conference title game to play the same number of Power 4 teams that we're playing every year. That's why I think they should do that, especially as the SEC is doing what they're doing. Because I think that should be the model. Is you play 9 conference games, but you got to play at least one Power 4 team in the non-conference. For some of those teams, that's already set. For Georgia, that's already set. All right, cool. We play Georgia Tech every year at the end of the year, so we're good. For Kentucky, that's already good. For Florida, that's already good. We're already set. We've got our rival. So that would be my thing. So that's kind of where I'm at. I still say that getting out of the ACC would benefit Notre Dame. I think that would give Notre Dame a lot more flexibility, because there's difficulty that other teams have of playing November games. I acknowledge that. I'm not saying it's no problem for teams to play teams in November. Like Alabama shouldn't schedule Notre Dame the week before they play Auburn. That would be silly of Alabama to do that. Why? Why does Alabama have to do that? Now maybe a month, 3 weeks before, sure, play Notre Dame and then Eastern Illinois and then Auburn, and you won't hear me complain about that you play Eastern Illinois. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with people that play teams like Eastern Illinois cry about other teams' schedules. That's more of where I'm coming from. But when you're Alabama and you've got to play Tennessee and Missouri and Georgia and Auburn and LSU and Oklahoma, I don't care that you play Eastern Illinois. I just don't want to hear your fan base crying about Notre Dame playing Boise State Navy. That's my whole point. But they shouldn't do that. I mean, you have to schedule smart. I don't, like I said before, would I do Alabama and Texas in the same year every year? No, I wouldn't do that. But you're playing them, there's 2 weeks in between Alabama and Texas in 2029. You've got Alabama on the 1st. You have nothing scheduled for the 8th. Then you're at South Florida on the 29th, and then you're on the 22nd or 15th, and then you play at Texas on the 22nd. All right, that's tough, but hey, that's life, right? There's weeks in between. There's going to be weeks where SEC teams play a team like Bama and a team like Texas within 4 games of each other. That's life. If you can't beat one of those 2 teams, you don't deserve to be in the playoffs anyway. If you also lose another game, or if you go 0-2, I should say this: if you go 0-2 in those 2 games, you don't deserve to be in the playoffs. If those are the only 2 good teams you play. I mean, there may be cases where you should be in, like this year, because of this, and this, but you get the point that I'm making, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't go 1-1 against those 2 teams, are you really a title contender anyway? And if you lose to one of those 2 teams and you still lose to NC State, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Wake Forest, Navy, Syracuse, Clemson, like that's a pretty darn good schedule. But like if you can't go, so let's say you got out at Alabama or home against Alabama, at Texas, at Florida State, at Clemson. That's pretty tough, including at NC State, teams like that. That's a brutal schedule. Well, yeah, but if you can't go at least 2-2 against those 4 teams, then you're not a playoff team. So if Notre Dame goes 1-3 against those teams, yeah, you scheduled yourself wrongly. Okay, cool, but you're not a playoff team. And I still believe, I have this crazy thought, Trev. You're going to think I'm nuts for this. I have this crazy notion that as a fan and analyst of a blue blood, that just making the playoffs shouldn't be the ultimate goal. Isn't that nuts? Like actually competing for the championship and building a team that's good enough to win a championship actually means more than just getting into the tournament. Isn't that nuts? I know that's crazy to think about. I'm saying sarcastically. But if you're not good enough to go better than 2-2 against those 4 teams, then guess what? You're not a playoff team. Go out and recruit better, coach better, build better. I don't want to be the Lincoln Riley coach that says, well, let's just put a cupcake schedule together. Now, if you force us to have a cupcake schedule, then we're going to dominate it, get into the playoffs, and kick your butt anyway. But we're just going to be more rested than you will be. So that's kind of my stance on that, Trev. But are there any teams, and we've talked about this before, are there any teams that you would like to see Notre Dame's schedule? First of all, for 2026, right now, Notre Dame's got 11 games that are givens. Right now, if you look at the Notre Dame schedule in 2026, their home games are against Rice, Michigan State, Miami, Boston College, and SMU, already slated. They have a neutral field game against Wisconsin, and then they have road games against Purdue, North Carolina, and Syracuse and BYU, and then also a neutral field game against Navy. So you have 11 games scheduled, 5 home games. You've got to get a home game. I mean, you're going to have a 6th home game. What would you like to see Notre Dame do with that schedule?
I personally would not mind them going out down to the SEC and scheduling a team in the early window to come up and play them at home, because you need another home game. I don't know who that team is. I'm not saying you go out and try to get Alabama in a one-off or Georgia, but really anywhere from the Missouri level down to the Kentucky level, I'd be okay with. I think it draws eyes. I think it draws a lot of attention. I think that'd be great. So I would go the SEC because that's the one conference that's not on the schedule this upcoming season.
Because they have 5 ACC teams, they have 3 Big Ten teams, they have 1 Big 12 team, and then 2 G5 teams. And so you've got Rice and Navy as your 2 G5s. You got BYU as your Big 12. You've got Michigan State, Purdue, and Wisconsin in your Big 10. So I'm with you. I would like to see an SEC team come up to South Bend at some point in time. If you look at the schedule, the other challenge for next year is your September and October is your September and week 1 of October are set. You're looking for games in between North Carolina and Navy. So the 10th, the 17th, and the 24th of October, you got to fill those 3 games. You've got to fill a game on November 14th, and then you've got to fill a game in the last week of the season. So that's kind of where I'm at. I wouldn't mind Stanford being on the schedule next year because it would be a return trip to Notre Dame. But if you can do better than that, I'd like to do better than that. Honestly. I would be more open to scheduling Stanford more long-term now that USC's off the schedule, because there's some aspect of rivalry there. But I'm nervous doing that because I don't know that Stanford's going to be good. And I don't want to schedule a long-term rivalry with a team that's currently bad. I think the optics of that are not great. And like we've seen, Notre Dame goes out and pounds Stanford. Apparently, they're not perceived as a rival by the committee, even though they've played each other every year for like almost 30 years, except for the COVID year. So, because Alabama gets credit for barely beating a 5-7 rival, but Notre Dame gets no credit for beating a 4-8 rival by 29. So I would like to see an SEC team as well. Who that is, I don't care. I mean, honestly, your schedule is set up in a way to where, as I said, I think the schedule is more challenging than people give it credit for. If you look at the schedule, there's 2 teams on it that have made the playoffs in the last 2 years. There's not a lot of people that have schedules that have 2 or more playoff teams on it from the last couple of years. Miami and SMU. There's another team on it that you have to play on the road in BYU that was 1 win away from being a playoff team. The rest of the schedule, it just depends on how good teams are going to be. Does Syracuse bounce back? Like, here's the thing, Trev. If Steve Angeli doesn't get hurt, that Syracuse game has a very different feel to it. They're not 3-7 going into that game. Can we agree on that?
Yeah.
But you can't assume that all these teams are going to get turned around next year. You can't assume that Pat Fitzgerald's going to turn that team around in year 1. You can't assume that Luke Fickell's going to get his team turned around. You can't assume that Fran Brown's going to get his team back to being a 10-win team again. You can't assume that Boston College is going to figure out how to play football. You can't figure out that you can't assume that Bill Belichick's going to have North Carolina. You have to schedule, I think, somebody that's at least and it projects to be at least an 8 or more win team. I'm not saying you have to have Texas or Ohio State on there, but you also can't have Minnesota on there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's kind of where I'm coming from on that final one. Other than that, I mean, I'm good. But if it's Texas or Ohio State, I'm not opposed to that since it's going to be a home game. Because it has to be a home game because you have only 5 home games scheduled. So that's kind of where I'm at. And then I don't really care when the game is played, to be honest with you, because it's going to be later in the year. It's going to be in October, November. It has to be. Because Notre Dame's not going to be playing in week 0, most likely, next season. Nor do they want to play in week 0. And I think if you're Notre Dame, you'd be stupid to schedule a team. And even if you could get clearance from the NCAA, you'd be stupid to schedule a team in week 0 this year.
Yeah.
After that was your line in the sand of your rival, like the optics of that would be garbage.
Yeah.
And I would criticize them. Like, hold on a second. You're going to schedule Kentucky in week 0, but you wouldn't play USC in week 0? You know, and the point is, I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think they don't want to play in week 0. Like, they want the Shamrock game to be the opener. They want to sell I mean, think about that. It's the Shamrock Series game. They want that to be the whole talk. The month leading into the season is Shamrock Series, Shamrock Series, Shamrock Series. So my thing is, look, get a quality team on a schedule. Doesn't have to be Ohio State, but if it is, great. But get a quality team on the schedule. That's what I want to see. If it's from the SEC, that's ideal. I agree with you 100%. But if it's not from the SEC, I'd like to see it be from the Big Ten. And you've already got 3 Big Ten teams on your schedule. I know this would overload a little bit, but I don't have any interest of playing a good Big 12 team. You've already got one. If Texas Tech wanted to come up here in November, I mean, I wouldn't say no to that. But do we know that they're going to be good again next year? I have no idea. And I don't know that you get as much out of beating them because it's Texas Tech, unless they go on a run and win a couple more games. So I would go SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and that would, and Stanford would be the order of what I would. Actually, no, I'd go SEC, Big 10, Stanford, Big 12. That's the order I would go with my desire. Thoughts on that, Trev?
I'd probably go just the reverse order. I'm somebody like I personally just don't really care about the Stanford game. Like they used to be rivals, but not like it's not one of those where it's like they've had like lulls, like they're just bad.
Yeah.
And that's that. I mean, if they're going to play, I'm
the
more
anomaly
so
was the era from 09 to 17, 18. That was the anomaly of their history.
Yep. So
I mean, heck, that John Elway didn't even make a bowl game.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy.
I watched that documentary or that show on Netflix about him last night. I had some tears welling up my eyes, man. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh man, but yeah, if Stanford's on the schedule, they're on it. That kind of goes back to the perception conversation that I talked about a little bit. So
you'd flip the Big 12 ahead of them? Okay.
Yeah.
See, that the only thing that I was coming from is I don't care about Stanford game either. We've said this before. I just don't care about any of the Big 12 teams either.
Sure.
Not for home game. Like I've said before, I wouldn't mind playing TCU like in Arlington in a one-off neutral site game so you can get down into Texas. But I don't care about TCU coming up to Notre Dame. Like, I don't care about Kansas State, Utah, anybody. You've already got a really good Big 12 team on there. That's the only thing I was coming from is sure. I don't really care about a second Big 12 team. And Stanford at least is something that you're familiar with, and they owe you a home game. True. I'd much prefer one of the first 2 options. So it's like SEC, Big 10, Stanford, Big 12.
I get you.
That's my thoughts. Who would be? Is there anybody that you'd prefer?
Like a specific opponent to be added to the home schedule?
Like a list of teams. I got to go through and even see what SEC teams have games available.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like without looking into it, I wouldn't mind like a Missouri, like a middle tier SEC team. I mean, Notre Dame just played at Arkansas. Don't know what availability they would have to come up to South Bend with a new head coach. Don't know what that would look like.
They're doing that in 27, I think, is their slated return. Is it 27 or 28?
Yeah, it's 28. That's the year they played
28.
Texas,
Okay.
Arkansas, and Bama.
Yeah. So they've got their set, but like right now, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So Arkansas for 26. Let's go to 26. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They got 12 already set. Let's see. Does Georgia have 12 already set? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They have 12. Texas has 12, or South Carolina has 12. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A&M has 12. So I don't even know if any SEC teams. Now, some of those teams could probably get out of a game. You know what I mean? Like there's probably some games they could maybe get out of, but the problem is a lot of these teams have games slated for November's, like in October's kind of packed because they're league games. So that'll be, I'm actually going to go through that. That's going to be something I'm going to do after the show today, Trev. I'm actually going to go through that and look and see who even has 12. So, and somebody just said they want to see Iowa at Iowa. Notre Dame needs a home game. They're not going to go through a season of playing only 5 home games. Like, so whoever they play has to be at home. So we'll have to go look and see who has availability, but that'll be an interesting little endeavor to go through and see who has games left. What about Texas? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. They've got 12 games too. So I'm going to have to go through this and see who even has games available for next year.
Yeah.
I'm curious if Texas, they won't try to get out of the Ohio State game next year. It's at home. They'd be silly to try to get out of that. Their schedule next year is interesting. They play Ohio State in week 2, at Tennessee in week 4. Then they have a bye. Then they have 8 straight games against Oklahoma, Florida, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri, LSU, Arkansas, and Texas A&M. That's not an easy schedule. That's not an easy schedule. Ole Miss is booked up. Let's see what Mississippi State has. I think they're booked up too. So, yeah, a lot of those SEC teams appear to be booked solid for next year. So we'll go through it and look at some teams, but going to be interesting to see. And that's why I think you might have to just kind of go to Stanford if you can.
Sure.
Because they owe you a return game. So that'll be interesting. So now, Trevor, I think we're done. Let me just look at see if there's a couple super chats that are related to this topic. So let's just bring those up real quick.
Right on. From Not a Professional Jay, appreciate you. I don't care about independence for independence sake. If there's more value than drawbacks for Notre Dame football and membership, great. If not, move on. For me, simple, as I just don't know enough about the cost and benefit.
But I do see independence for independence sake is at the heart of what makes Notre Dame Notre Dame. It's and let's be honest too, Notre Dame is also a business. You can say that they're not all you want, but they're a business. They're a for-profit business. People say that schools are not. They are, because if you don't have, like just the way the sports are, and legally they're not. But what I'm saying is they are. If it became financially unsustainable for Notre Dame to remain an independent, they would join a conference. That's when they'll join a conference. When it's just like, look, we don't have a TV deal. We don't have this. We can't do this. We're falling way behind. We can't sustain a good football team being independent. Then they would join a conference, and they'd have to. But they're not even anywhere close to that right now. Nor do I think they will be. So, being independent for independence sake is very important to who Notre Dame is. And I'm glad that they don't just look and say, well, we can make more money being in the conference, because they could. But that goes against who we are, and that matters to me.
Another one from Not a Professional Jay. Thank you for the super chat. What about the idea of scheduling 13 games a season?
Well, you can't. Legally, you can't. You have to petition the NCAA for that. One of the ways that you can get away with that is you can play, I think it's if you play Hawaii, especially if you play Hawaii at Hawaii, I think that's one of the times you can get a 13th game. And I have to look into the specifics of how that works, but there have been teams that have played 13 games in the past because they played Hawaii. It's basically incentivizing teams to try to go play Hawaii. the NCAA has done that to try to get teams to, non-conference teams to go play Hawaii. Conference opponents I don't think get that advantage, but I'm pretty sure that non-conferences do. Like there was talk that Vanderbilt was trying to play a 13th game. This is why I say, could you imagine Clark Lee? He's trying to play somebody. I don't see Clark Lee, who's trying to invent a game in championship weekend to prove that they're good, saying, well, we're not going to play good teams. We're going to play soft. Like, come on, man. I just don't see that. But you just legally, you can't. You have to get a waiver from the NCAA. Now, Notre Dame could petition for that and say, look, we'll play every week in championship weekend. We'll play somebody. We'll play any team that doesn't make their conference championship game that's willing to play us. We'll play them if you give us a waiver. Fine. Okay. I'm not against that. But I don't think it's not legal, and I don't know that Notre Dame necessarily needs to do that.
That's kind of how I look at this. I just don't understand what the point would be.
It goes back to like what Andrew said, is you've got to prove something.
Yeah.
You've got to get that extra data point that the last year's national champions didn't need, apparently.
I would hold it in the same light. If I was Notre Dame, I would say, hey, we'll play a 13th game during championship weekend, but you have to evaluate it like a conference championship game. We have to get rewarded if we win this, because we are doing, even if we're in the playoff field already, you can't drop us out if we lose it. And you have to reward us if we win it.
Because that's what you do for SEC teams.
100%. And in some cases, you get rewarded for losing by 21.
Oh. Nobody else would have lost that impressively by 21 points and looked as good rushing for -3 yards. Well, if you think they rushed for -3, what would everybody else have done? They'd have run for -50.
Hey, bro, in their defense, they went for it on 4th down in the Iron Bowl that one time.
That's true. They needed to against that really, really good 5-7 Auburn team.
Look, man, it was impressive. It might not be impressive for some, but I'm an analyst, and I understand why that's impressive.
Yeah. Yep. I was thinking about this. You know who Notre Dame's might end up having to play next year if teams won't play them, which would be kind of funny. UConn's looking for a lot of games next year. So I wouldn't be against that. I wouldn't necessarily be against that. Anyway, speaking of Hawaii, what a job Timmy Chang did this year for that team.
Right?
I mean, heck of a job he's done with their, what they call him. What's the kicker's name? What's his name?
Tokyo Toe, baby.
Tokyo Toe. And then that little tiny quarterback from Hawaii, like that kid's fun to watch. That's a.
I think he entered the portal.
Did he really?
I think so.
That sucks.
I know.
Kids these days, man.
But not the Tokyo Toe, baby.
Kids need to be more loyal to these coaches, because these coaches just don't jump in a portal. Oh, wait, never mind. I'll take that back. I take that back. Anyway, so Trev, that was the 2 super chats that were related to the scheduled conversation. So now we can wrap it up.
Well, that's going to do it for part 1 of today's show here in the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're getting ready to preview the college football playoffs, the quarterfinals that are going down tomorrow and on New Year's Day. But before we get there, folks, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, with this being the offseason, the best way to stay in the now, be sure to be a premium message board subscriber at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 2 of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we are talking about the college football playoff quarterfinals, something that we all believe that Notre Dame should have been in and should be playing for. But unfortunately, we don't get to talk about Notre Dame preparing to take on one of the final 8 opponents, albeit they should be. But with that being said, there is still playoff football going on this weekend. So we wanted to preview the 4 big games. But before we dive into it individually, Brian, I know that there were some things that we wanted to talk about in terms of this year's playoffs. We've said it before, not all playoffs are created equally.
Yeah.
Like, for example, last year we talked about, Notre Dame started out in the 10 seed, very similar to what they did this year. Last year, they rose all the way up to the 5th ranked team. This year, obviously, we understand how that played out. They dropped.
They freaking dropped despite destroying everyone they played in the month of November. Correct.
In the last rankings, they dropped. Shocker. Yeah. But with that being said, not all playoffs.
Think about this. In the last 2 games against Power 5 teams, Notre Dame outscored their opponents 119-27. And I think all but 6 of those 27 were scored in the 4th quarter. and they dropped in the rankings. Think about that. And tell me that wasn't a rigged game.
Yeah, those are thoughts that keep me awake at night. That's 100%
Yep.
for sure. But
yeah,
like you said,
but there's a lot of interesting storylines, right, Trev? I mean, there's this supremacy of the two big leagues that's at stake this weekend, in my opinion. The SEC versus the Big Ten. There's a chance that 3 SEC teams could advance. There's a chance that 3 Big Ten teams could advance, or somewhere in between. The only league that's guaranteed to have a semifinal team is the SEC, because you've got 2 SEC teams playing this weekend. That's an interesting narrative to me, and obviously the winner, the champion, will help determine that. But like, the SEC has really struggled in the playoffs the last couple of years. I think the only team that won last year was a team in year 1 in the playoffs, and they had a decent win over Clemson, a very ugly, close loss to Arizona State where they almost blew a 17-0 lead. Your champion got smacked by Notre Dame, and Tennessee got blown out by Ohio State. Well, they're off to a little better start this year in the playoffs. They're 2-1. And the one is against that one game was against each other, and then Ole Miss played a G5 team. So I don't know that we really know yet how good the top teams in the SEC are. We're going to find out this weekend. Georgia, Ole Miss obviously play each other, but can Bama beat Indiana? I'm drawing a complete blank on because there's 3, right? So 2 are against each other, and then you've got Bama against Indiana. Then you've got Oregon against Texas Tech. Can the Big Ten get one of those teams in? And then, of course, Ohio State and Miami. It's going to be very fascinating to kind of see how that goes, because I do think conference narratives are at stake this weekend. Can the ACC finally have a team kind of advance deeper in the playoffs? They haven't had a team in the Final Four in a while. I think since Clemson in 20, right? I think it's the last time the ACC's had a team in the Final Four, because nobody from the ACC made it in 21 or 22, correct? Florida State got jobbed in 23, and then nobody made it last year. So,
and the last time that a ACC team made the Final Four in the playoffs was when there was only 4 playoff teams.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And they got destroyed. Clemson got destroyed. So, and Miami gave them a win, obviously last weekend. They got a win over Texas A&M, which was a good win by them. But I do think that can the ACC, make some noise? Can the Big 12 gain some respect? Because we've actually seen a Big 12 team win a playoff game, a semifinal game in recent years. TCU played for the championship in 2022. So, but that's the only opportunity the Big 12 really had, in my opinion, to have a team in that was good enough to beat somebody. I didn't think Arizona State was good enough to beat anybody last year, and they proved me wrong to a degree in that they were competitive against Texas, but they still couldn't win.
Chief Brody also brought up a good point in the chat. Notre Dame also made the playoffs in 2020.
That's right.
ACC team.
That's right.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that. Yeah,
they both got smacked.
I know it.
That's right. Good point, Chief. Good point.
There are some really interesting storylines, though, to your point. Conference storylines are really interesting. I like some of the individual matchup storylines, too. Like Alabama versus Indiana. That's old money versus new money. Like, that's like, hey, like, you're the new kid on the block. Are you going to be able to run and hang with the big boys because you got your opportunity last year and you weren't able to do that? Alabama's in a really interesting spot. To me, they're on the precipice of being Georgia or Clemson. It's like, okay, like, here's your opportunity to prove that you are still one of the top premier programs in college football. Are you going to be like Clemson, and this is kind of the start of your very slow decline? Or are you going to be like Georgia, that's just impossible to kill? Mm-hmm. That's going to always be around the conversation. I think that's really interesting. I'm very intrigued to see how some of these matchups go down. But even this year, we're starting to see differences in the playoffs compared to last year. Last year in the first round, all 4 home teams won. This year, they was split 50-50. And the only teams that won at home were the 2 teams playing the G5 teams.
That's right.
Alabama won on the road. Miami won on the road. What do we see in the quarterfinals? Because last year, we watched every single team that had buys lose. Is that going to happen this year? What's the time off going to look like? Now, last year, a little context, you had the Big 12 champion as one of the teams that received the bye. The G5 bid also got a bye. And then the 2 non-Big 12 or G5 teams that got the bye faced the 2 teams that were playing in the national championship. what is this year going to be? I think that's fascinating too.
It is. I mean, because that's the thing, right? Is like the overreaction to how last year went caused them to blow up the system they'd come up with. And our argument was, well, why are you losing your minds? Because we could argue that the best team won every one of those quarterfinal matchups, that the best team won all of the first round games. Yeah, it wasn't just that the home teams won, but the better teams won. Isn't that kind of what a playoff is meant to be? If you're good enough to go on the road and win, then you advance, like Miami did with Texas A&M this year. And then the quarterfinals, all the teams that got byes got beat. Well, is that because there's some inherent disadvantage to getting more time off? Or could it be that the 4 teams that won were the better teams, which I would argue they were? I think Texas was better than Arizona State. I think Notre Dame was better than Georgia. Nobody believed that till the game got played, and then all the Georgia fans wanted to make a million excuses for why they lost to Notre Dame. But Notre Dame was the better team. We said that going in, and that's how the game played out. Penn State was better than Boise State, and Ohio State was better than Oregon. I mean, Ohio State almost beat Oregon in the regular season at Oregon. And then they had to go out west to play them again and smack them. The four best teams won. I mean, we said going in the playoffs that Georgia was in the conversation for a top 5 team in the league, but we said going in, or at least I if I remember correctly, I don't want to say we definitely said it, but I remember you and I talking about it, that the 4 best teams in the playoffs were, in fact, Oregon, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Texas were probably the top 4 teams in the country. Well, the way it worked out, Oregon got jobbed a little bit. They had to play one of the other 4 best teams. But Ohio State, if it wasn't for the game against Michigan, we have a very different opinion of who should have been the number 1 seed last year. Because I think Ohio State would have beat Oregon in a rematch and been the number 1 seed, in my opinion, if they didn't do whatever nonsense they did against Michigan last year. But they overreacted and turned it into, there's this underlying thing going on that made unfair advantages for whatever, and so we've got to blow up the rule. Well, now you have best seed playing best seed, or right seed playing right seed, because I do think there was some merit to one of the levels of the argument last year. Why does the number 1 seed have to play the number 6 team in the second round? Why does the number 2 seed in Georgia have to play the 5th best team in the country in round 2? That's not fair to Georgia. They earned the number 2 thing. They should have had to play the 7th best team in the country, which would have been the win. What was that? Was it Indiana? Wouldn't they have been? No, Tennessee would have been 7. And then the 10 seed would have been, it'd have been SMU, right? Wouldn't it have been Indiana, SMU in round 1?
Yep.
Well, that's a much better opportunity for Georgia to advance. So I am actually okay with the change of getting rid of conference champions, getting the first 4 automatic bids. I would have still kind of stepped to that, but I would have just put a caveat in, but you have to rank in the top 10 to get a bye. Or maybe top 8, something like that. But it is what it is. And I hate reseeding after playoffs. I think that's a terrible idea, by the way, because you're still assuming certain teams are better when you don't know that. What I think was unfair last year was that Georgia and Oregon had to play higher seeded teams than they otherwise would have based on their ranking. I'm okay with that, but now that excuse is out the window. The number 1 team is playing the number, it'd be the number, it was 8-9 last week, it was Oklahoma, so you're playing the number 9 seed. Number 2 is playing the number 10 seed. Number 3 is playing 6, and number 4 is playing 5. So you now have it. So if the quarterfinal teams get beat this year, then I think we have more of a legitimate conversation about, are the teams that get byes playing at an unfair advantage? And if they go 0-4 this year, I think the calls for a 16-team expansion get deafening in how loud they get. Because the thing about a 16-team playoff, no more byes. Everybody plays in round 1. So I think even if they go 1-3, do you think that's enough, Trev, to give the 16-team folks the ammo they need to say, look, we're punishing the best teams in the country, by forcing them to be off longer than teams that they play. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that would give them enough ammo. The other thing that I could see them potentially doing too is sticking with the home team theory. Because so far in 2 years of a 12-team playoff, the home team has only lost twice, and both of those losses came this season. I could also see them trying to do something to where the teams that also receive a bye get to play at home, because we know how much weight the playoff committee put in that. But in short, yeah, I do think that would be cause for them to go straight seeding 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, and then so on and so forth down the road.
Because if you expand to 14, you still have the same problem.
Yep.
The higher seeded teams are still having to go longer, less practice time for, to be prepared for a game. They're more rusty, which is not something that existed. It kind of existed in the 14 playoff, but not really. Sometimes you make the playoff by not playing in your conference championship game and you have extra rest, and that other team played more recently. But by the time those games were being played, Trev, you were still both off a month. Like it kind of balanced itself out. But I do think if there's not a lot of success by the higher seeded teams in this year's playoff, I think it's almost impossible not to go to 16. And honestly, I think there'd be some justification to that. I don't know if you agree with that, but I do think hold on a second now. Now, 7 of the 8 quarterfinal games have gone to the lower seeded team that had to play the week before. Are we really properly rewarding the teams that had the best seasons? You know what I mean? Like, they have to go into these games rusty against more seasoned teams. Miami, 9-10 days ago got to play in a game and a hard fought game, and they're more tested. I think there'd be some merit to that if we see that, because I don't know that you can say all the lower seeded teams are better this year. I don't think Alabama's better than Indiana. I don't think Miami's better than Ohio State. I don't think Ole Miss is better than Georgia. I think the only one you could maybe argue is 4-5, but that's always going to be arguable, in my opinion. 4 versus 5 is always debatable.
In any tournament. Team. Absolutely.
Exactly. Now, do we agree that Texas Tech deserved to be the 4? Yes, because they won their conference championship. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're better than Oregon as a team. And that's 3 and 6 and definitely 4 and 5. That's always going to be somewhat debatable, no matter what. But you get to 2 versus 10 and 1 versus 9. I don't think there's any debate. There was debate last year. I think it was debatable whether or not number 1 Oregon was better than number 8 Ohio State. I think it was debatable that number 2 Georgia was not better than number 7 Notre Dame, because number 7 Notre Dame was ranked 5th and number 8 Ohio State was ranked 6th. Now we're getting to where it's more debatable. And Georgia and Notre Dame were a lot closer in the rankings. I think it was 4 and 6 or 4 and 5 going into the SEC championship game when Georgia won and jumped up and created some separation. So I don't think you can make that case this year. And Trev, we'll get into it when we talk about the spreads, but if you look at the FanDuel spreads, there's only one of these 4 spreads that's within a touchdown, 6.5 or more.
Yeah.
So I think all the home teams are favored to win except for 1, correct? Isn't Oregon favored to beat Texas Tech?
I'm looking right now. Yeah, they are by 2.5.
So again, that's the 4-5. You're going to see that more often than you will see a 2 versus 7 and whatever. So I would argue that how these games go is going to impact greatly the conversation about do we stay at 12? Do we go to 14? Do we go to 16? I think watching Notre Dame and BYU get screwed is going to automatically kind of get some to say we got to expand, because it was Notre Dame and BYU this year, but it might be us next year. I think if this quarterfinals does not go well for the home teams, you're going to see a major cry to get to 16, which I think is actually good, because I would rather it go to 16 than 14. I think 14 is pointless. I think stay at 12 or go to 16 is kind of how I look at it, Trevor.
Agreed. 14 is pointless, especially if you're going to keep the same structure. Yeah. The only reason why they would go to 14 is because there's a loud enough outcry from Notre Dame fans and BYU fans to where they're just like, okay, well, we'll put it at 14, and then the 11 and 12 ranked teams get in. That's the only way that I see that happening, but it's pointless. Go to straight seeding, go to just 16 teams, make it a formal playoff it. Don't put it to where one team has a 9-day break and the other teams have like a minimum 3.5-week break.
Yep.
There's just no point.
Yep.
No point. Go straight up to 16.
And you have 4 games on Friday, 4 games on Saturday. You know, then when you get to the quarters, you're exactly where you are now. You have 8 teams. It only impacts that first day of the tournament. So instead of having 1 game that day, you have 4.
And then the top 4 teams will get that home playoff game that, you know, they want, because I've heard that as a counterpoint. It's like, yeah, you get the bye, but you don't get to play at home. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, if you think about it, you know, Athens, Georgia got punished because their team was really good in a way that Norman, Oklahoma did not, for their team not being as good. You see what I'm saying? Like, the communities matter. I mean, so our fans don't get a chance to watch our team play at home for an extra playoff game because we were too good.
Right. Well, and if you want to reward them, give them a home game. Like, make it to where they don't have to travel. Because, I mean, even though Oregon or Ohio State tomorrow night is the home team, they're not playing in Columbus. They're just wearing the scarlet jerseys. And like, well, you're the home team, so you also just don't get to elect the coin toss. Like, you know what I mean?
Right. That's the advantage, right? You get to wear the home team jerseys and the other team calls the coin toss, right? Like, it really is. There's no advantage. It's the same number of tickets. You don't get any advantages in that regard. The only advantage is you get to pick the uniforms. That's your reward for being the number 2 seed. You've got to play a game in Texas, and the number 1 seed has to play a game in California. And a team from Indiana has to play a game in California. That's your reward for being the number 1 ranked team. You don't think Bloomington, Indiana would have benefited from having their team host a playoff game? You don't think the economy would have greatly bet? I mean, Notre Dame certainly did enormously. The South Bend community, Mishawaka, Michiana, the whole community benefited greatly from Notre Dame having a playoff game last year. Brought millions of dollars into the community. So, yeah, why punish those teams because they're good?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even Indianapolis to a degree, the amount of people that flew in, even though it was an in-state game, the amount of people that flew into Indianapolis alone to travel up to go to that game. I mean, yeah, I agree completely. Well, Brian, let's dive into these 4 quarterfinal games, and where we're going to get started is the Miami-Ohio State matchup. That's going on tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. kickoff on New Year's Eve. You can watch all these games will be aired on ESPN, so that will all remain the same. As of right now on FanDuel, Ohio State is favored by 9.5 points. So I thought that spread was also extremely interesting, but very interesting matchup between the Hurricanes and the Buckeyes.
Trev, I want to talk about that spread first. Because I know when you and I were talking about this before the show, you had a similar reaction to this. Talk to me about this, because I got to admit I was surprised by the spread. My comment to you, I think, was if Miami shows up to play, this spread is stupid. We just don't know if Miami's going to show up to play. This is a team that you still don't know what you're going to get from week to week. But if Miami shows up to play, I don't think that this is they're not, unless Ohio State like punches one in late. I don't think that you're going to look at this and be like, okay, you know, that wasn't a close game between 2 teams. That's kind of my thoughts. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think the spread being that high is twofold for me. First and foremost, I think people are still assuming that this is the Ohio State offense that we saw last year.
Right.
And I'm here to just tell you that it's not. Not better, not worse, just it's a different offense. The only worst part about it is they don't run the football as effectively. And I understand that they have Bo Lamar Jackson as their running back. But that's different than having the 2-headed monster of Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. Sure. It is. And I've been saying all season long, and Ohio State will have the opportunity to prove me wrong tomorrow. The seasons where they've had the most success is when they've been able to run the football. Yeah. They won the championship in 2014. Who'd they have? Zeke Elliott. They won it last year. Who'd they have? 2 1,000-yard rushers, Judkins and Henderson.
Yep.
In 2019, they were extremely competitive in the playoffs. Who'd they have? Played one of the arguably the best semifinal games that we've had in the playoff era. I mean, it's up there with Notre Dame, Penn State. It's up there with Georgia, Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl back in 2017. That Ohio State Clemson game in 2019 was nuts. What'd they have that year, Brian? A 2,000-yard rusher in J.K. Dobbins.
Yep, he was
man. But every single year Ohio State has good receivers. Mm-hmm. That's not new. Mm-hmm. People are like, oh, they'll be fine. They got insert premier wide receiver here. It's like, okay, well, Marvin Harrison Jr. never won a ring at Ohio State.
Yep.
He was great. It all depends on how they run the football. So it's a different style of offense. So one, I think that's part of it. And two, I think they're also looking at the fact that Miami on the road only put up 10 points of
Right.
offense in a really ugly game
And
against an
did
A&M
that
defense.
late.
Yeah.
You say,
Very
okay,
late.
if the conditions were better and weren't as windy, maybe they both added a couple field goals. Does not change the narrative. So it'd have been 9-9 instead of 3-3 going into the last 2 minutes of the game. You know what I mean?
Barn burner territory,
Like,
Brian. Careful, bro.
okay, whatever. But that's the thing about Miami. Their defense showed up. Their offense did not. And Ohio State's defense is way better than Texas A&M's. I think the key for Ohio State when you look at this matchup, and I love this. You look at the all-time rivalry. The Ohio State holds a 3-2 advantage over Miami. Miami won the most recent game. That was back in that 2011 season we talked about. They won that game. The year before, Ohio State beat Miami by 12 in Columbus. The 2 games before that, in 03 and 99, one was a bowl game and one was the Kickoff Classic, something I'd love to see brought back at the beginning of seasons. I missed the Kickoff Classics. You and I have talked about that before. But, this is only the second time they've played in the postseason, which is kind of interesting. The only other time was for the title back in 02 when Ohio State had that massive upset over Miami. It's hard to look at this and feel good about Miami winning because I just have a hard time seeing them score. And look, here's a couple things. Like Ohio State had a soft schedule this year. Not their fault, but it's a very soft schedule, especially when you look at offensive teams. They played very few really good offensive teams. So I think we went into the postseason, meaning Big Ten title game and beyond, saying, okay, we know their D is good, but how good? I mean, I think it's really good, but they haven't been really tested. I know they lost the game, but their defense showed themselves to be legit by shutting down the Indiana offense the way that they did. So I think Ohio State's defense is legit. I think what that game also showed is that offense isn't as good as people think it is, to your point. They've played 2, I would argue, really good offenses this year, or defenses this year, Trev. And if you disagree, please feel free to chime in if you think that I'm off the mark on this. But I think Ohio State this year played 2 really good defenses. One of those really good defenses fired their defensive coordinator after the season. And I think that's Texas in the opener and Indiana in the last game of the year, the Big Ten title game. And Ohio State scored 14 points in the first game, 10 in the second game. Now, I think they got better than they were against Texas, but like even against Michigan, who has an okay defense, they scored 27 points. But it wasn't like a real pretty offensive football game. This is not a team. And then if you want to say that Michigan is the 3rd best defense they played all year, and I think that would be accurate to say, they didn't get to 30 in that game either. And this is a very good Miami defense. I think the big key for Ohio State is, okay, you've got a young quarterback. You don't want to put too much on his shoulders. You've got to protect him, but he's going to have to make some plays in this game. He's going to have to. And you've got to protect him. Because if you can, I said this about A&M. I said this about every team that the Miami's played. Not that their secondary is bad, but if there is a vulnerability for a playoff team, that's their vulnerability. Their secondary can still be had if you have a good game plan and you can protect your quarterback. You can make some big plays, especially with the receiving core they have, which is got some much needed rest since the Big Ten title game because they were banged up. Jeremiah Smith and Cardinal Tate were banged up going into that last game. So I think they've got to be able to protect Julian Sayin and let him – they got to let him go more than they did in the Big Ten title game. And that's where I'm very curious to see how this game gets called because you're going to have a different play caller this game than you had. I'll be honest, I was not a huge fan of Brian Hartline as an offensive coordinator. I was not a huge fan of, like a lot of Ohio State fans would tell us, well, they're doing this ball control thing to stay ready for the postseason. So you're telling me they were also doing that in the Big Ten title game? No, their offense just isn't good. It's not terrible, but it's not what it's been. But it should be better than it was. I think it was kind of held back by coaching. I'm very curious what that looks like now that Ryan Day's back in charge of the offense and their receivers are rested and healed up because they were not healthy. And that you could see it in that game. Cardinal had no burst when he played in that game, like no burst. And he'll have some burst in this game. He'll be healthier. He'll be a little more fresh. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. I think it comes down to that for Ohio State. And then for Miami, you got to protect Julian Sayin against this Ohio State front. And I'm very curious to see if Ohio State can get pressure on him with just their front. They've been doing a pretty decent job of that this year, but Markel Bell and Francis Minoa are a very different tackle tandem than what you faced for most of the year. With all due respect to Indiana, who's got, to me, the best coached offensive line in college football this year. By far. The job that Bob Bostad did. Even better than Iowa. I think Iowa had better talent. I think Indiana was better, coached better. They were both elite offensive lines. Markel Bell has improved quite a bit this year in pass pro compared to where he was last year. And Francis Minoa, we know, is very good. But I still think Markel Bell can be had by really fast, twitchy guys. Is Caden Curry long enough to really do anything against him? Can Kenyatta Jackson use his speed to beat those guys? That's going to be a big key to this. And can Matt Patricia design pressure packages that go after Carson Beck? You have a secondary good enough to run with Miami. Miami's going to make some plays in the pass game, and that's okay. But you've got to make Carson Beck make big throws in this game, because here's the reality of what you and I both know to be true. Against good teams, Carson Beck, if you can get any pressure on him at all, will fold. He was, to me, terrible against Texas A&M. Terrible. He made some plays on the last drive. That was, to me, more about Texas A&M kind of going away from what worked than it was Carson Beck doing anything, in my opinion. I just wasn't impressed with him. And then, can you run the ball at all in Miami? And I know this is something that I know you wanted to talk about, Trev, and I'll kick it to you to discuss this, but what they did in the fourth quarter against A&M is what they should have been doing the whole game. You could see it early, like, dude, I think there's something there if you can run on them. And they didn't try it to the fourth quarter, and then they were good. You got to be balanced in this game, and you've got to try to run the football against Ohio State's front.
Yeah, I mean, the keys for either side are different but the same. For Ohio State, I agree with you completely. On offense for Ohio State, it's the offensive line has to play well in both phases. More so in the run game than in the pass game. Because if you make this Ohio State team one-dimensional and you're letting Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bain pin their ears back on their offensive tackles, I don't love that matchup for Julian Sayin. I don't. And that's how you neutralize teams that have guys like Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. When they can't get the ball to them, it doesn't matter. You can have them on your team, but if they don't have the ability to get targeted, it just doesn't matter. Run game is going to be very, very important for Ohio State in this game. And that's something that Ohio State fans have even struggled to admit, because they have the shiny toys in Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. So to a degree, I understand it. But sometimes football isn't as simple as, well, Jeremiah's down there somewhere. It's just not that simple sometimes, especially in the playoffs. On defense for Ohio State, you got to shut down Mark Fletcher. Texas A&M failed to do that in the fourth quarter, and they lost the game. Carson Beck did not win them that football game. Like, Texas A&M did two of the three things that they needed to. They bracketed Malachi Toney, which was shockingly the first defense all season that put a max effort into doing that. But they bracketed Malachi Toney, and they prevented Carson Beck from hitting any big plays over top. What they failed to do was stop the run game. When we talk about getting pressure on Carson Beck, pressure is twofolded with him. Yes, it's the physical pressure in his face, but put the game on his shoulders. He cannot handle that. He cannot, and that's been at every. He is a 6-year senior and can't handle that. I got into a debate with this Miami fan once. We were talking about if Notre Dame and Miami were to rematch. And I was like, you're acting like C.J. Carr is the same quarterback he was on August 31st. He's like, well, you're acting like Carson Beck is the same guy. It's like, well, Carson Beck's a 6-year senior. He is the same guy. He's been the same guy he's been the last 3 years. C.J. Carr is playing his first ever collegiate football game. It's different. So with Carson Beck, Ohio State's defense absolutely has to shut down the run game. That is an indirect way to put pressure on Carson Beck. Because if he can't rely on Mark Fletcher to go for 5, 6, 7 yards a carry, and Carson Beck then has to try to make plays, that's when it changes. So that's going to be huge. Carson Beck there will be moments in this game. We see it in the playoffs. We saw it last year. There's going to be moments where Carson Beck is going to have to put this team on his shoulders to put a drive together. When has he shown his ability to do that in college?
Yeah. Not often against good teams. Here's one aspect of this game that's interesting. Ohio State has the number one pass defense in college football. Again, they had the number one pass defense, I believe, last year, depending on kind of what you looked at. Notre Dame was number one in rating. Ohio State was number one in yards allowed per game going into the postseason. And Notre Dame was number 4 going into the postseason. And when you looked at kind of how that Ohio State team performed last year compared to this one, to Notre Dame, the one big difference is Notre Dame gets the ball. Ohio State doesn't get the ball a lot. They had only 10 picks last year in 16 games. And this year they only have 8. Miami's not as good as Ohio State. They give up more big plays than Ohio State. And somebody in the chat said this as well. They do get the ball a lot, though. They've had 14 picks in 13 games and obviously had 2 big picks of Marcel Reed in that game. That was the game. They could get to the ball. I do think if they're going to pressure him, they do need to find more ways to get the football. And I think that's going to be big. Can one of the 2 secondaries, not only which secondary forces the quarterback into most mistakes, but how many of those mistakes are drive killing mistakes, either taking a sack, third down, but more importantly, can you get the ball for your other team on some of those plays? I think that's going to be a big part of it too. I don't think either of these teams are going to run the ball great. I think they're going to both try to run the ball enough to keep the other team honest, to set up some big play opportunities. I think both of these teams are going into this game thinking that it's going to be a little bit more of a lower scoring game because these are 2 really good defenses. It's about whose quarterback can make the most plays, but then limit the mistakes. Because I could see Julian saying going out there and completely outplaying Carson Beck outside of 3 plays, and those 3 plays tend to be a bad sack and 2 turnovers. And Carson Beck plays poorly, but he doesn't turn the ball over, and Miami wins 17-14 because of those turnovers. Right? That's where you've got to be careful with your Ohio State if you're Ohio State. But try to do things to get your receivers in one-on-ones. It's going to be hard to do that if you're not able to run the football. Because Miami is going to say, hey, we're going to stop you with our front 6. We want you to run the ball. And you're going for 4 yards a pop. Don't know that's going to work a whole lot. We're not going to let you beat us with Jeremiah Smith. And we're not going to let you beat us, with Cardinal Tate and Brandon Ennis and Max Clare and those guys. I think that's going to be the strategy. And it's going to look a lot, in my opinion, like what Texas did last year. We're going to make sure 4 doesn't beat us. If you beat us with Bo Jackson and Julian Sand and Max Clare, fine. Tip the cap to it. You're better than us. But you're not going to beat us because of Jeremiah Smith. Maybe I'm giving Corey Heatherman too much credit. We'll find out. But I've been impressed with the things he's done this year as a D coordinator to take certain things away from good teams. I think he's going to have a game plan that says you're not going to beat us with 4. We're not going to leave our corners on an island with number 4 a whole lot. In non-blitzing situations. So I think that's going to be a key for Ohio State. Can you protect Julian Sand, but can you at least be balanced enough to where you force Miami to get out of there? We're not going to let you throw on us game plan. And then for Miami, you got to protect Carson Beck. You got to protect Carson Beck. Because like you said, Trev, if he's getting pressured with some consistency, he will make those big mistakes that gets Ohio State to football. And that'll be the game. So that's my look on it. So, Trev, we've talked about the matchup. Let's make our predictions. Let you go first.
Yeah, I have Ohio State winning this game 24-13. So I do actually have the Buckeyes covering their 9.5-point spread. Here's
you
why.
Had it. What'd you have it?
24-13.
24-13. Okay. I thought you said 16, and I'm doing the math. I'm like, that's not. Carry the 1. Yeah, I don't think that's more than 9.5. 24-13. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. 24. I have Ohio State winning 24-13. And here's why. This is by far the best defense Miami's faced all season. This is not the best defense that Ohio State has faced. Albeit it's a very good defense. Mm-hmm. I don't want to discredit it.
I would rank it number 2.
That Ohio State has faced?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd rank behind Indiana.
Yeah, I would too. Here's my gripe with Miami's defense. Not even a gripe. In no way is this me saying that it's overrated, but I think the strength of the front 7 gets carried over into the defense as a whole. There are holes in that secondary. I saw them open up against Notre Dame. I saw them open up against Texas A&M, but that was more a testament to Marcel Reed than it was Miami's defense, in my opinion. Like, people were open. People talk all the time about the numbers Marcel Reed puts up. Look, man, he completed like 50% of his passes against Notre Dame. It's just easy to complete those big chunk plays when people don't get covered for 35 yards. That's a Notre Dame thing. That's not a Marcel Reed thing. They went up against a defense where, again, there were holes. They just weren't as wide open. A better quarterback, a more accurate quarterback would have been able to hit some of those throws, especially later in the game. Well, they're going up against that in Julian Sain. And I think that's going to play a big factor in this game. I really do. If they can protect Julian Sain in the pass game, if Ohio State's offensive, and when I mean protect, I don't mean shut down. They don't have to walk away from this game with allowing only one pressure, no sacks or hits on the quarterback. If you can just not let Akeem Mesidor and Ruben Bang take this game over like what Notre Dame's offensive line did, I'm giving this win to Ohio State. I have them winning 24-13. That's where I'm at with this one. At some point, this game is going to come down to, I could see it. I could see it. It's 17-10, and it's in the third quarter, and it's like, okay, momentum is really starting to swing in favor of Ohio State. Carson Beck has to put together some sort of drive to make this a game again, and I don't think he's going to be able to get it done. Whether that's taking a bad sack on third down, whether that's turning the football over, whether that's whatever that may be. So I have the Buckeyes winning this one by 11.
We're not super far off with a lot of the things that you said, Trevor. Our score, my final score prediction is 24-16. I basically don't have that final pull away score. I do think that Miami's going to be able to move the football in this game at times enough because, look, you can't keep Malachi Toney down for 4 quarters. No one's done it yet. As much emphasis as Texas A&M put on that, he still did what he did in the fourth quarter of that game. You're going to need, if you're Miami, you're going to need some of those other receivers to step up and make plays. You're going to need, CJ Daniels to make plays. You're going to need to be able to run the football. Problem is, this is a team that's not real easy to run football on Ohio State. I think the reason that I think this game is going to be a little bit closer is because I still have question marks about the Ohio State offensive line. They rank 6th in college football on fewest sacks allowed. They haven't played a whole lot of teams that are very good getting after the quarterback. And 5 of those 11 sacks came in the Big Ten championship game. He gave up 5 sacks against Indiana, who, in my opinion, has a very good defensive line. So does Miami. You could argue who's got a better D-line. It doesn't really matter. What matters is they're both very good defensive lines that can get pressure on the quarterback. Miami is top 10 this year in college football and in getting producing sacks. They've had 41 sacks in 13 games. So I look at it, Trev, and I think that's going to be the key. I think Ohio State's going to struggle to consistently move the ball and score, but I have more faith that their talent at quarterback, at running back, and receiver are going to be able to make enough plays to go win the game because Miami's got a great defense, but so does Ohio State. So then it comes down to which offensive line do I trust better? Well, that's advantage Miami. But okay, that's fine. But then what skill talent do I trust more? And I just think Ohio State has more of that. They've got a quarterback I trust more. They've got receivers I trust more because I'll see your Malachi Toney and I'll raise you Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis. You know what I mean? So it's like, I think that ultimately is the difference. But I do think this, as long as Miami shows up to play and they're locked in, and I don't see any reason why they won't. They went down to College Station and they were ready to play last week. They didn't play well, but they weren't bothered by the moment. You know what I mean? Like that's more of what I'm saying. I think Miami does show up to play. I think their issues at quarterback, their issues in the secondary are going to be enough where they're just not going to have enough firepower to outscore Ohio State the way that Indiana did. And I don't think they're going to be able to shut Ohio State down offensively the way that Indiana was. So that's why I go 24-16.
Last thing I'll say about this matchup, and it's an individual matchup that I'll be very interested to see what Matt Patricia does. Does he leave Lorenzo Styles on Malachi Toney? Because he's kind of their nickel slot corner. after what Lorenzo Styles gave up to Charlie Becker in the Big Ten championship game, I don't know if that's going to be the case. Now, do they do something like Notre Dame did against USC, where Leonard Moore shadowed Mekhi Lemon the entire game? I don't know. But who do you trust with that? Do you put that burden on Jermaine Matthews? Do you put it on Davison Igbinosun? Do you put it on Lorenzo Styles? Do you have Caleb Downs do it? So very interested to see what they do to bracket Malachi Tony, but that is a very interesting individual matchup outside of the trenches that could be a deciding factor of if Ohio State wins, if they win big, if they lose, if this is a closer game than what I predicted. Very interested to see what Matt Patricia does there.
Yep.
Very interested. Brian, let's talk about the second game, and we're getting into the New Year's Day slate. Going back up to the top here, number 5 Oregon Ducks play the number 4 Texas Tech Red Raiders in the Capital One Orange Bowl. Right now on FanDuel, Oregon is actually favored in this matchup by 2.5 points. So kind of a pick'em game. Over under is set at 51.5, which I thought was interesting. But as of right now, they square off noon on New Year's Day. Interesting matchup in the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, it is. I think it's kind of ridiculous that the team from Texas and Oregon are playing in the South Florida, but whatever. And they're playing at noon. So like we're going to take the two teams that are past the Central and West Coast time and play them at noon. That totally makes sense. They're ESPN, but I was a little surprised by this line, to be completely honest with you. I really am. And I kind of understand it. I understand why the line is where it is, because Oregon's been here before. They're the proven team. A&M's the new, Texas Tech's the newcomers. How are they going to perform, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as we said, Trev, I was not a believer in Texas Tech coming into the season. I wasn't even a believer in Texas Tech until late in the year. But when I watched that team with the playoffs on the line just step up and dominate everyone, I was like, this team's a little bit different. This team is built a little bit different than some other teams we've seen kind of fade down the stretch when the pressure gets too big. And they didn't even play well early against BYU and still dominate that football game. And the reason why, and this is what makes Texas Tech a good football team, they're not if this goes well, they win. If this doesn't go well, they don't win. They can beat you throwing the ball. They can beat you running the ball. They can beat you stopping your pass. They can beat you shutting down your run. This team it doesn't have to all click for them to win. And win impressively. And then when I look at Oregon, I see a team that proved a lot to me in November with some very good wins. And we said when the playoffs started, I think Oregon was ranked too high because they hadn't beaten anybody. But we said it doesn't matter because in November they're going to prove themselves to be as good as people rank them, or they're not, because they'll lose games. And look, they went on the road and won a tough, hard-fought game against Iowa. They beat USC at home. They beat Washington on the road. The only other team that beat Washington on the road in the last 4 years is Ohio State this same season. But at the same time, I still look at this matchup and I'm saying I still don't understand why Oregon is favored. I still think Texas Tech should have been favored. But when it's 2.5 point spread one way and I think it should be 2.5 the other way, we're splitting hairs. I think these are two good football teams that play well on both sides of the ball. I think Oregon, what they did against JMU is a little bit concerning, giving up all those yards and points, but that's not who Oregon's been all year. I think that was a byproduct of time off and overlooking a team that's not very good.
Well, and almost all of James Madison's points came in the second half once it was
correct.
Correct. You could tell they were starting to look ahead.
So I don't really care a lot about those stats because we saw them throughout the year play pretty good defense for most of the year. Trevor, I mean, the only game that they lost this year, they gave up 30 points to a team that scored over 40 points a game. They held Indiana to 326 yards of offense and 4.8 yards per play. There's only been 2 teams all year in the regular season that had over 5 yards of play. That was Northwestern in week 3, and then USC in the second to last game of the season. Everybody else was sub 5. This isn't an elite defense, but it's a good defense, and it's a quality defense. But I think Texas Tech also has a very good defense, and that's the side of the ball that has proven to be legit. We know Texas Tech can score. We had a great running back last year. Taj Brooks was a dude. And that was a pretty quality offense. But the difference this year is they're so balanced. Even though they lost the guy that was supposed to be their starting running back at the beginning of the year, and Quentin Joyner. See, I did it right. I didn't say Quentin Dunbar. Go me. I finally got it right, Trev. But even though they lost him, the transfer from USC, Cameron Dickey went out and rushed for 1,000 yards, and Jacoby Williams rushed for almost 800 yards this season. And they're a pretty good 1-2 punch. They really are. And the receivers they're a perfect example of you don't need an elite number one to have a pretty good receiving core. Caleb Douglas is a good player. Reggie Virgil's a good player. Coy Aiken's a good player. Terrence Carter's a good player. The two kids out of the backfield catch a lot of footballs. They combined for over 50 catches and almost 600 yards of offense, or 600 receiving yards out of the backfield. They just have so many good weapons that it's kind of hard to cover all of them. And then Oregon is getting a little healthier. The receiving core is getting a little bit healthier. But I just wonder if Oregon has the balance to beat a team like Texas Tech when it's all said and done. And can they protect Dante Moore well enough in this game? I mean, the best defense that we saw, the two best defenses we saw Oregon play this year, my opinion, hands down, are Iowa and Indiana. I think those are hands down the two best defenses they played. They scored 20 points in one of those games, 18 points in the other. They had 267 yards of offense, 4.2 yards per play in one of those games, and they had 373 yards, 6.5 yards per play in the other. They did rip off some chunk run plays against Iowa. That impressed me, but their pass game didn't do a whole lot because of the conditions of the game. I mean, it was dumping, so it's kind of hard to really evaluate their pass game. They were also missing – didn't Kenyon Sadiq miss that game?
Oh, I mean, Kenyon Sadiq, DeCorian Moore, Gary Bryant. So
it's hard because Bryant got hurt early in that game. Wasn't it first
series.
Or second quarter?
Yeah.
So it's hard to really evaluate their pass game based on that, but they ran the ball in the fourth quarter pretty well on Iowa, but still only scored 18 points. And I think this Texas Tech defense is every bit as good as the Iowa defense. And that's been something that that's the thing I wasn't expecting this year from them. I wasn't expecting all those new players to kind of come together and be as dominant as they were and to shut teams down. I mean, BYU doesn't have a great offense, but it's a solid offense, and they completely shut them down twice. They had 455 yards of offense in the two games combined. Texas Tech has yet to allow a team to get to 400 yards of offense, and they've only had two teams all year, Trev. Only two teams all year had over 300 yards of offense against them. It was Arizona State, and the one game they lost, and the other one was a K-State game. Utah had a very good offense this year, Trevor. Very good offense. They scored over 40 points a game this year. They averaged 478 yards per game this season. They were over 400 yards in every game this season, except for one. They went for 263 against Utah. Literally, Trev, the next lowest output they had was 412 yards this season. So Texas Tech has played some pretty darn good offenses this year and shut them down. I'm a believer in Texas Tech this year. Now, the moment's different than anything they've played before, and I get that, and that could be their downfall. But it's not like Oregon has looked like barn burners in all their big moment opportunities either in the playoffs the last couple of years. They didn't look like they wanted to be in the Rose Bowl last year. So I'm back and forth on this matchup, but I really like Texas Tech in this matchup. But I do wonder, boy, that offensive for Oregon is getting a little bit healthier. Is what we saw against JMU legit, or was that just because they were so much better talent-wise than them?
This matchup is extremely interesting. So many different storylines coming out of this one, but here's my biggest takeaway, and this is very big picture because I agree with a lot of the things you're saying about both teams. Teams that we've seen have success in the postseason have shown that they can win all different variety types of games. Even like the 2019 LSU team that I believe is the best offense in college football history. That offense is insane. Okay. Even they had a 23-20 victory in the regular season. They've shown that they can win all different types of games. They've shown that they can win blowing people out. They've shown they can win shootouts like what they did against Alabama and Tuscaloosa in 2019. They could win a one-possession game. Here's the thing that I'm very interested in this matchup. Texas Tech has played in one possession game all season long, and they lost it. Now, Baron Morton was hurt. So that's what's interesting. There's two different ways to look at that. It's like they've blown out every single person that they've played. Very true. What happens when they have a team like Oregon that can play with them on their level? I don't know what that looks like. Not saying that they can't. I'm also not saying that they can. We've seen look at Ohio State last year. They've shown that they can blow people out. They can win back and forth level games, and they can also win like kind of the ugly, grinded out type of games. Notre Dame was that way last year. So there's been this trend. Even we had to wait a little bit for Michigan to do it, but even they showed that they could do it in 2023. So I'm very interested to see what role that plays, because I would argue Oregon has shown that they can do that. They lost to Indiana. They both have losses. I would argue Oregon's loss is a better loss. It's kind of like Texas Tech was without Baron Morton. So how do you evaluate that?
But there's no debating. They lost to a much better team.
Better team, yeah.
There's no debating that. No debating.
Absolutely. So very interested. But Oregon showed me something in the month of November that I didn't know if Dan Lanning, one, or just the Oregon program, two, had kind of the chops to do. Can you go into the month of November and play Iowa on the road in just absolutely horrid conditions? Can you play USC? Can you go to Washington on the road and have success on all three of those stages? And they could. For Texas Tech, I'm a believer in that. I think that they're much more of a contender now than I did back in October. But my takeaway is it was 2 games, but you've looked really good against the same opponent. So like that's where my hang up is with them. It's like it's blowing people out is extremely impressive. I don't want to take anything away from the Red Raiders for the performance they've put in. But you played in one possession game all year and you lost. I have no idea how that's going to factor into this one. What is the Baron Morton effect? Because they were without him against Arizona State. So a lot of different things working at play here. This is my most intriguing matchup of the weekend. I don't care about the Georgia Ole Miss rematch. I don't think we'll get to it in a little bit. I don't think the Indiana-Alabama matchup is going to be overly close. Second to this one is definitely Miami-Ohio State, but this is a very, very intriguing matchup. For all the talk about Baron Morton and the Red Raiders offense and Dante Moore and the Oregon's offense, these are two very underrated defenses going to play. Very underrated. This is going to be fun.
We actually did talk about that with Notre Dame last year, though, Trev, if you remember. We talked about how Notre Dame hadn't played a close game really since Louisville.
Yeah.
I mean, since September. The closest game they had was a 14-point win against USC where they never trailed.
Right.
And led by 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And then Notre Dame went on to go to the championship game because they didn't play another one-score game until the semifinals, and they found a way to win. But again, Notre Dame had, with all due respect, had kind of been on some bigger stages over the years than Texas Tech had been.
Oh, yeah. And
I mean, like they had to go to College Station last year. They had to go to the Coliseum. I mean, it's just a little different than playing TCU and Kansas State and
100%.
Like that.
Well, and I know the Texas A&M game was a 10-point final score, but that was with a last-second field goal. That was a much more back-and-forth game than what the final score was in Week 1 in College Station. And the Louisville game, winning that one-possession game is what gave us the confidence to be like, hey, I think they can go on a run.
That was all the way back in September when looking at how would they perform in the playoffs.
Sure.
So I'm not dismissing your point. I'm saying that we at least have evidence of a team that kind of went on a roll for 2 months, hadn't played in a close game. I mean, Texas Tech's played in a closer game more recently than Notre Dame did. Now, you said they lost the game, but like you said, they did have their backup quarterback in the game. I just look at this Texas Tech team and say, that's a very fair point, but I don't know that it's a given that this is going to be a close game in the fourth quarter. If they play like they have been playing, I do think it's going to be a competitive game, but I do think they win the game because I look at them and I think they're more balanced, and I look at Oregon and some of the close games they played. I don't think and this is all like conjecture because I have no way of proving this. I think if Texas Tech goes to Penn State, Happy Valley in week 3 or 4, it's not going to overtime. If they go to Ames, Iowa City in November, I don't know that they need a field goal to walk off at the end of the game. Like, I could counter with that, and I have no idea if that's true or not, but it's just looking at the way that they've played. So you have to go to and say, well, what are the matchups? And that ultimately is where it comes down to for me. I think that Oregon's offensive line is good, but I don't think they've played great against the better defenses on their schedule. And this is a really good defense. This is a legit good defense. Look, I know the Big 12 is not very good, but the one thing the Big 12 can do, Travis, they can score. They have teams that can score. I don't think either of us would argue that. I mean, we talked about Utah as a team that could score. They had 6 other teams in the league that scored over 30 points a game, and Texas Tech only gave up 10 points a game this year. I mean, they shut those teams down. And like when they gave up 20 points, you were kind of surprised. And they gave up 20 to Kansas State in a blowout win, and they gave up 26 to Arizona State in a game where their quarterback didn't play. And you're looking at it and you're like, dude, nobody else like even came close to that. Their next highest scoring game was 17 points by Kansas. So I think that's the thing for me is I think they have a legit defense and I think they can run the football. And I still think that matters in college football. Now it's going to come down to this. This is going to be the key. I actually trust Dante Moore to make big throws if you give him time in this game. I think Dante's played well enough in these big games that he made some big throws in bad conditions with almost entire receiving core out against Iowa. He made some big-time throws against USC to win that game. He made some big-time throws against JMU. Now, he's got to avoid the 2 turnovers that he had in that game. The question, though, is can the Oregon O-line give him time against a really, really good pass rush? That's, to me, going to be the big question. And on the other side, can Baron Morton make the throws he needs to make? Because he missed some. That BYU game, first half, was a bit of a troubling moment for me if I'm a Texas Tech fan. It's like, hold on now. Baron missed some big opportunities in that game and missed some throws and just didn't look great in that first half. Yeah, they ran away with it in the second half, but that was more about the defense than anything else. And this is a better defense than what you faced in the Big 12 title game. It's definitely more athletic defense than what you faced in the Big 12 title game. Can he hold up and make enough throws? That's the key. If he can just be solid, I think Texas Tech wins. If Oregon wins, I think they expose Baron Morton for just being kind of an okay quarterback. So I think that duel is going to be different because I give Texas Tech the advantage in every matchup except one, and that's at quarterback. Now, the other thing is it may matter, it may not matter, but your offensive coordinator is trying to do 2 jobs, being your offensive coordinator and being the head coach at Kentucky. How does that impact the Oregon? And your defensive coordinator is doing the same thing for Cal. How does that impact Oregon in this game? And in a game that's really close, I think those type of things can matter. And that, at the end of the day, is why I went with Texas Tech.
What's your final score prediction?
31-28. I think they finally get that close win. I do. I think that you're going to see Oregon with the ball last, and the Texas Tech defense just makes the plays they need to make to end the game. And they win 31-28. What say you, Trev?
My final score prediction is also 31-28, but I'm taking the Ducks in this one. I am. I think they're the more battle-tested team. I do. They faced a variety of different styles of offense this year, whereas I think Texas Tech hasn't faced a passing offense with this much potential. I don't. I mean, especially at the quarterback position. I mean, like a lot of the quarterbacks they faced in the Big 12 were kind of dual threat-esque type of quarterbacks. Devin Dampier at Utah, Jalen Daniels at Kansas. Yeah.
Lockmeyer.
Yeah. And
so
Wegman
that's was dual threat this year too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I don't think they played Josh Hoover this year. Texas Tech.
Did they not play them this year?
No, they didn't play TCU this year. And so a lot of those quarterbacks, while they provide a dual threat aspect, which Dante Moore can, but Dante Moore's more like a Kenny Minchie.
Exactly. He's a passing quarterback that can run if he needs to, which he did against Iowa. Which he made some big plays just like against Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. I also don't know if Texas Tech has gone against a receiving core, albeit if they're healthy enough, a receiving core with this much firepower either. I think that's going to be very interesting to see how they handle that. Because I'm with you. I think the as far as matchups go, I think the advantage goes to Oregon with quarterbacks, but I also think the advantage in the matchup goes to Oregon's receivers against Texas Tech's DBs. And that's not a shot at Texas Tech's DBs. It's just I think Oregon has a lot of talent at the receiver position.
Mm-hmm.
And it's deep, like we saw against Oregon. He was having to make some money throws with not his top premier targets. So very interested to see how this one goes
He's
down.
legit. Dante's legit.
Oh, yeah.
The only concern I have with Dante is, will he have time?
Yeah, 100%.
That's the big, and that's what I think is going to keep him from being able to make those game-winning plays. Is I think the pressure is going to, not the pressure of the moment, the pressure of Texas
the physical pressure,
the actual pressure that comes from that defense is going to get to him. And it's a very opportunistic defense, and Dante has had some issues against teams that are good at forcing turnovers.
Yeah.
Saw that last week against JMU.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can get away with that last week. You're not going to get away with that against Texas Tech.
Agreed. But I also don't know what Texas Tech's ability is going to be to limit the big plays for Oregon. They rank third in the country in yards per play this year. Oregon does. And again, Texas Tech has not faced an offense with this much passing firepower.
Sure.
How are they going to be able to handle that? If their pressure gets home, I like their chances in this game. But that's why I see this being closer. I think a lot of people walk away with this thinking it's going to be a barn burner. I think the final score is going to be close, but I don't think it's going to be just this Big 12 matchup, which is going to be like 45-38, because these are two underrated defenses going at play. And then for Texas Tech, I also question their ability to protect Baron Morton. I don't think that Oregon's pass rush is as good as
but it's good.
Texas Tech, but it's good.
It's still
and
good.
BYU, who doesn't have that stout of a pass rush. Like, I think Oregon's pass rush is significantly better than BYU's. And BYU was able to generate some pressure in both games against Baron Morton. So it's just their ability to protect him is going to be interesting. And then I also go back to just the stages. Oregon has played at this stage before. Now, has it been successful? No. I'm not going to try to paint the picture that it has been. But by and large, I think the stages, I go back to Oregon being the more battle-tested team this season. I think that they are. Dan Lanning has coached on this type of stage before, and I'd be very interested to see how Joey McGuire handles going from 8-5, 7-6, 8-5, 12-1, buy in the playoffs. All eyes are on you. What do you do? And so that'll be very interesting. So for those reasons, I'm going with Oregon 31-28. So same margin, just different.
Yeah, but that reflects the spread. 2.5 point spread. It's 4 versus 5. I mean, these are things we were talking about earlier. You're going to get a lot more of these 4 or 5 matchups that end up being some of the best quarterfinal games. I mean, what was the most competitive quarterfinal game last year?
Yeah.
Number 4 Arizona State against number 5 Texas. By the way, that was the best pass offense that Texas Tech played this year. And Sam Leavitt threw for over 300 yards to back up your point that you were making earlier.
Well, and that's and to further your point about this matchup being so close, everything that you were saying, and I don't want to speak for you, but I'd assume it'd be the same. Everything that you're saying of you picking Texas Tech to win, I'm like, yeah. Like, I get that.
Well, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I get that. It just comes down because, like, you and I have the same concern about Texas Tech. It's about Baron Morton. I just think the thing that sent it over the edge to me is, in a close matchup, you have one team whose entire staff is focused on one thing and one thing only, and that's winning this game. And another staff whose coordinators are both trying to play two sides of the coin and prepare for this game while also preparing to be head football coaches somewhere else. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to perform well. I mean, Charlie Weiss had a tweet out the other day where he talked about how he was doing that with the Patriots and they went and won a Super Bowl. And for a month, he's trying to win a Super Bowl and also be the head coach of Notre Dame. Now, granted, you had Bill Belichick as your head coach and you had Tom Brady as your quarterback, but still, I mean, it's still the NFL, and the Patriots weren't like this juggernaut that was beating everybody by 30, like college teams are. It's a different animal. So I think, Trev, we're both seeing we said a lot of the same things. It's just the math at the end of the day is, I see it being close here. You see it being close there, but I think it's going to be a good football game. Agreed. Like I said, I think the pressure that Texas Tech can put on Dante Moore is going to be key. And I think the two coordinators having split duties for the last month is going to be another part of it as well, especially the portal opening up in a couple of days.
The day after their game.
Yeah, which is nuts.
Crazy.
But and this one is tough too because I like Texas Tech, but I'm like kind of sick of Joey McGuire running his mouth. and I'd like to see it kind of get slapped shut. You know what I mean? Because then I don't have to hear from them anymore. So I wouldn't be upset if Oregon wins this football game. But I just think Texas Tech's a better team, better all-around team. So we'll see how it goes. Going to be a fun day. Going to be a fun game for sure, Trev.
Brian, let's dive into the third game that's kicking off at 4 p.m. We are talking about Indiana, the number 1 seed, taking on the number 9 seed Alabama Crimson Tide, and they are facing off in the Rose Bowl. So they're facing off out west. Kickoff is at 4 p.m. Obviously, it's on New Year's Day. You watch it on ESPN, and right now the Hoosiers are favored by 7.5 points, which I thought was really interesting. So 7.5 points favorite for the Hoosiers. Over under in that game is set at 48.5 by our friends over at FanDuel. So Brian, Rose Bowl, this one, the grandfather of all sports bowls.
Yep.
So interesting.
If you're an Alabama fan, I just want to prepare you. You're going to get triggered during this breakdown.
Yeah.
So if you don't want to hear something bad about your football team, I'm just warning you now. If you don't want to get mad, leave now, because this is not going to be an overly positive evaluation. And look, we could be completely wrong on this. Obviously, we've been wrong on predictions before, but I just don't think this is a good matchup for Alabama. I don't. I look at this game and I think Alabama doesn't have the elite talent that people think that they do. I think that Alabama is not better than Indiana in the trenches. I think that Indiana has athletes that can hang with Alabama. And I look at this Indiana defense, and it's basically a better version of last year. And outside of one play, they did pretty well against the Notre Dame offense last year. Outside of one play, which was a 98-yard touchdown run, which is 101 yards more than what Bama had in the SEC title game, the entire game. So I look at it like this, Trev, and I think Indiana is more prepared for this moment. They were not ready for the moment against Notre Dame last year. I mean, you could see it in Cignetti. We talked about this. Like, he was just like, he didn't know what to do in that game. Like, he was talking tough before the game, and I think he was trying to convince himself that they could win that football game. And they just got overwhelmed by Notre Dame. Notre Dame was just too fast, too talented on both sides of the ball, too balanced even in that game to really give them problems. I don't see that in Alabama. I really don't. I think Alabama's got a good defense, not a great defense. I think Alabama has a very mediocre offense. And they were down, 17-0 against Oklahoma?
Yes,
before
sir.
Oklahoma just started shooting themselves in the foot. And what was it? It wasn't 17-0. It was 17-7.
Yeah.
It was 17-0.
I'm almost positive at one point it was 17-0.
Let me just look it up, because it was definitely like 10-0. I'm trying to look it up. I don't remember for sure. Just give me a second here to look this up. It was 17-0 in the second quarter. Alabama scores a touchdown. Oklahoma hands them the ball on a punt that was so bad that people are like, dude, was he paid off? And I'm like, I mean, I don't have any evidence of that. But that was terrible. Punters don't do that. You know what I mean? Like, I've never seen a punter in any moment do that. And then Mateer throws a pick six where there's literally not an Oklahoma receiver on the screen. You know what I mean? Like, that game was more about Oklahoma choking than it was Alabama.
Yep.
And I watched this team go down to Indianapolis, actually up to Indianapolis, correct? It's up to Indianapolis from Bloomington.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yep.
Northeast.
Up to Indianapolis and take on the number one team in the country, who's a very good football team, the defending champions, and never flinched the way they flinched against Notre Dame last year.
Correct.
Because they learned from that experience against Notre Dame. And that helped them go on the road to Oregon and beat Oregon, and it helped them beat Ohio State in the title game. This is not last year's Indiana team.
No.
And we saw some Miami fan like, Alabama or Miami's got an infinitely better defensive line than Indiana, who's got all these 2 stars. Like, if you still think that's what this matchup is, you're going to be sadly mistaken, because there's NFL players throughout this defense for Indiana. Their secondary is better than it was last year. Their D-line is legitimately good. They get after the quarterback. They can shut down the run. They can defend the pass. And yes, they did not play a tough schedule. Give you that. 100% I'll give you that. But they played 2 playoff teams this year, and neither of them were in Bloomington. They went on the road and beat Oregon by 10 in a game that was only close because Fernando Mendoza got it. Threw a pick 6.
Look at you. Man.
I almost wanted to do it just to mess it up, just to be funny. When then Francisco threw that pick 6, and that's the only reason it was even competitive. I mean, they shut Oregon down that game. And then they played Ohio State and beat Ohio State in a game where they had to come, they had to go make some plays at the end of the game. They had to make some big throws and big plays to win that game, and they got it done. And so I just think this is a really good football team. I do. I think they're, unlike last year's team, this team is more battle tested, to your point, Trevor, where last year they really only played one good team all year, is Ohio State, and they got smacked. This year they went on the road and beat Oregon. They had to play a really gritty, hard-fought game on the road against Iowa, much like you said about Oregon, in a game that they showed they can win ugly. They had to play a hard-fought game at Penn State. You could say they shouldn't have been in a hard-fought game against Penn State, and I would agree with that, but they were down, and they had to come back and make some plays to win. This is a much more battle-tested team than they were a year ago, and I think they needed that. They needed to know what it was like to get punched in the mouth and have to punch back. Last year, they got punched in the mouth twice, and they never punched back. This year, it's been a different story. And that's what makes me think this team is good. And let's be honest, Trev, Alabama hasn't played good football in 2 months. I mean, we'll dive more into the matchup, but they just haven't been a good team. And you look at the Oklahoma game against them, and it was an ugly game. It really was an ugly game. And I think, as I said before, I think that was more about Alabama or Oklahoma choking than it was anything about Alabama. And they went for 260 yards in that game, gave up 362. I mean, they let John Mateer throw for over 300 yards against them. With all due respect, if you can't stop John Mateer from throwing the football, what's Fernando Mendoza, Elijah Sherratt, Omar Cooper, and EJ Williams going to do to you?
And Charlie Becker.
I was going to say that, yeah. I was going to call him Charlie Baker. That's from Necessary Roughness. But I don't like this matchup for Alabama. I don't think they're not going to. I mean, they still don't try to run the football. I don't think they're going to be able to run on Indiana anyway. I mean, they ran for 28 yards on 25 carries against Oklahoma. You're not going to beat Indiana doing that, man. You're just not. I'm sorry, you're not. And as we said, if they were doing the old BCS system, I don't think Alabama or Oklahoma would have been in the playoff this year. I just don't think either one of those teams are very good. Oklahoma deserved a right to be in the playoffs. We said this before that game. They earned the right based on what their resume. But we also said before that game what? They're still not a top 10 team. Their resume gave them, they earned the right to be in that game, but their resume was not good enough they weren't a top 10 team. And they were up on Bama 17-0 before they started choking that game away. And lost by 10. That's not, if Indiana gets up on you 17-0, go start up the bus because you're going home and your season's over with. That's where I'm at.
I would argue down the stretch, Alabama didn't even play like a top 15 team.
Agree.
I just don't think they're a good football team. I don't. And I'm sorry, people may disagree with that, but look, and people can you can miss me with the whole, I'll take a roster full of 5 stars. Okay, well, here's what this roster full of 5 stars does. They rank 37th in the country in points per game, 76th in the country in yards per game, 69th in the country in yards per play, 61st in the country in rushing touchdowns, 125th in yards per rush. They rank 44th in the country in yards per attempt passing, 61st in the country in yards per completion. Yeah, they rank in the top 5 in passing touchdowns because they can't score in any other way. They rank 86th in the country in sacks allowed. They rank 40th in the country on third down and 42nd in the country in the red zone, and that's just on offense. So, yeah, you can have all the 5 stars you want to. But if you're pointing them in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter because you compare that to what
Yeah.
IU's done so far this season, and it has been beyond impressive.
Yep.
4th in the country in points per game, 8th in the country in yards per game, 7th in the country in yards per play, 1st in the country in passing touchdowns, 3rd in the country in yards per attempt, 2nd in the country in points per game allowed. So that's not bad for a bunch of 2-stars. Look, Alabama shouldn't have gotten into the playoffs, and that is a hill I'm willing to die on and will take to my grave. You're not going to convince me that somebody that lost by 21 points in their conference championship and lost to a 5-7 team in a game where they never led deserved to be in the playoffs. And I think that gets exposed on New Year's Day.
Yep.
Are they fine? Sure. They got in on name alone.
Yep.
And conference affiliation. So I guess I can't say name alone.
And sure, they could prove us wrong in this game. I just don't think they will. And look, here's another thing factoring into it. You're in Southern California in December, late December, early January. You look at the weather, a lot of talk about rain in this game. Who does that benefit? It ain't Alabama. The team that can't run the ball and has to throw the ball to win against the team that can run the football and has very good coaching on both lines. I mean, I don't think that bodes very well for Alabama in this game at all. So, not that Indiana's like a phenomenal rushing team. They've had their moments where they've been good and moments where they haven't been good. But with all due respect, I think I have a lot more faith that Indiana can run on Alabama, who's a good run defense. Don't get me wrong. Alabama, the thing, if Alabama wins this game, it'll be because their defense forces some turnovers and makes some big plays in this game. I just don't think that's going to happen. But I look at this Alabama team and yeah, they've got a good rush defense, but it's not as good as what Indiana's is. I mean, Indiana, Trevor, gave up 218 yards in the opener to Old Dominion on the ground. Since that time, they've allowed one team to rush for over 100 yards. Let me rephrase that. They've allowed one team to rush for more than 92 yards, and that was Penn State, who went for 117. Ohio State went for 58 yards on 26 carries, and Ohio State wanted to run the ball in that game. They tried to run the ball that game. Just couldn't. And last year against Notre Dame, outside of the 98-yard touchdown run, they did a good job of shutting Notre Dame down. Notre Dame's only other touchdown drive in the first half was a 16-play drive where they had to convert multiple third downs and short throws and Riley scrambling around and doing all that. It wasn't they were out there just moving the ball up down the field.
At one point in the game, Jeremiah Love had a long rush of 98 and 94 total rushing yards.
Yes. That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I just think Indiana's the better team. I think people are looking at the name, the logo on the helmet. They're looking at the numbers on the Bama helmet and the IU on the other helmet. And they're just assuming, oh, this team's got a bunch of 2 stars, 3 stars, or whatever. Those things stop mattering once you put a college helmet on. And you are what you are in college. You are not what you are in the NFL. I mean, in high school. And, you know, Notre Dame's going to have a couple Hall of Famers here in a few years that played for them, Harrison Smith and Zach Martin, and neither of them were top 100 recruits. Just want to, remind people of that. Will Fuller was not a top 100 recruit. And I just
arguably, arguably their best player on the team next year was a 3-star.
Leonard Moore. I'm like, okay, it's Boubacar, maybe. Oh, Leonard Moore. Yes, you're 100% correct.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. Miss me with the stars stuff.
You are what you have become in college. And there's a lot of NFL players for Indiana, a lot of them. Now, the key in this game, here is the key. If we're wrong, why will we be wrong? Because obviously we're both picking Indiana in this game, and we'll get to our prediction. But here's where we're going to be wrong. This is the one matchup that concerns me for Indiana, especially if it's a bad weather day. Alabama's D-line is still very good, and it's going to be healthier for this game. I think LT Overton, he missed the Oklahoma game, right? I believe
he's back.
He's going to be back for this game, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, early in the year when they lost to Florida State, they didn't have Tim Keenan. He'll be playing in this game. I do worry because I think the Indiana offensive line is coached incredibly well. They're gritty, they're tough, but they're not super talented. There aren't any, in my opinion, day 1, day 2 draft picks on the offensive line for Indiana. They've got a great coach. They're tough as heck. They're experienced. They've been playing a long time, but they're also not super talented. And will they be able to hold up against the Bama front? Now, the good news is Bama doesn't necessarily run the ball or rush the quarterback incredibly well. That'll be a key. But when they're on, Bama's run defense is pretty good. Will it be good enough in this game? We'll see. But that would be my one concern. Can they pressure Fernando Mendoza? Can they force him into some mistakes? Can they have some drive-killing stops and pressures, things like that? Those are things I'm going to look at that could result in Mendoza making some picks because he hasn't played great in their bigger games, which is why we didn't think he should have won the Heisman. But they don't need him to play great. They just need him to not play bad to win this game.
Agreed. The only other area that I could see where we do get this prediction wrong is Indiana's not able to take care of the football. Now, historically, all season long, they've done a really good job of being able to take care of the football. But Alabama's defense, as overrated as I think that it is an opportunistic defense. They've had big-time defensive plays kind of swing the momentum of games. Yep. They did it against Oklahoma. The Tennessee game was closer than what it looked like until a 99-yard pick six kind of blew that game wide open. Fernando Mendoza has to avoid.
And they had a huge strip of a play and a pick six against South Carolina that allowed them to come back and win that game. Because their only early score was a pick six, and then they also had that strip where South Carolina's trying to run the ball out, and they ripped the ball out. You're 100% correct on that.
So that is a huge key. If I'm wrong, Fernando Mendoza is not able to play at a level, especially with sloppy weather, with it looking kind of gross. They're not able to take care of the football as well, because that is one thing I will give Alabama. And the other thing too, and I know this has been a rainy day parade on Alabama, and honestly, I think rightfully so. The one thing that I will also give them props for, albeit an ugly game against Oklahoma, that was the first game all season that Ty Simpson, in a matchup where it was kind of down in the dumps, he never got that look. Whenever he does in those big games, I always text Brian. I'm like, Ty Simpson's got that look again.
Yep.
I'll give it to him. He was a leader on that sideline, still down 17.
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying that he is the reason they came back, but
he played his role.
Exactly.
He played his role
as a leader of that team. So that is another thing that the Crimson Tide have going for him, is like, okay, on the biggest stage that he had played in this season, first round of the college football playoffs, on the road against Norman, or on the road in Norman, Oklahoma, against a team seated higher than you, down 17. Ty Simpson all season for the first time didn't flinch. And that is something that I'm willing to give credit for, because you're going to have another moment in this game where it's like, okay, we're going to see the Florida State Ty Simpson, because I watched Ty Simpson play in a nasty weather game in season 1 opener, and he was deer in the headlights.
Yep.
How does it happen again? Very interested to see.
Absolutely. Trev, let's make some predictions for this game. We've dissed Alabama enough. We can make our prediction. I'll let you start.
Yeah, I have Indiana winning this game 31-17. Indiana's a very, very balanced offense, and this is by far the best defense I think that Alabama has faced all season. Indiana's defense is legit, and people might not like to hear that. I'm not saying I'm the biggest fan in the world of saying that, but I will always give people my honest opinion. Indiana's defense this year is legit. All of their ratings, everything that they've done this year, and yes, earlier in this show I talked about how they weren't a crazy battle-tested team, more so than last year. But to Brian's point, in the two games that they've played, they've looked absolutely legit. They spotted Oregon 7 points with a pick six to get them to 20 points.
Yep, still won by 10.
And they held Ohio State's offense to 10 points. I don't care who you are. When you hold a team to 10 points, that's impressive. Especially once you add in it's Ohio State, defending national champs. On that stage, Indiana's defense is legitimate.
And they shut down that Iowa offense, kept them to 13 points. Oh, wait, no. Bad example.
If anything, it's like, how did you let Iowa score 13
My counter is they gave up 13 to Iowa and 24 to Penn State. I'm just saying. No, you're absolutely correct. I actually am going with a little poetic justice. Last time Indiana played in a playoff game, they lost 27-17. I think this year in the playoff game, they get that back. The reverse happens. They win this game 27-17. I like Indiana this game. I do. Like, for all things you said, I just think it's a more battle-tested team. They're not yes, they played a soft schedule outside of 3 games. Well, they won all 3 of those games. And won them convincingly. So this is a different team than the one that we saw last year, that played really one good team all year in the regular season, got smacked. I mean, Illinois is not like the world's greatest football team, but Illinois is a good football team, and they beat them by 53.
Yeah, I was about to say they're not world beaters, but they're good enough to not lose by 53.
Exactly. And if you watch that game, they poured it on in the second half, but it was over by halftime.
Oh yeah.
Like if they didn't run it up, they would have won 43-10. You know, they did go on the road and beat Iowa. They did go on the road and beat Oregon in back-to-back games. You know, they did go on the road and beat Penn State. They did beat Ohio State, you know, and on the neutral field. So they won their 3 biggest games, and not a single one of those games were played in Bloomington, Indiana. That tells me something. So I do think this team is different. And yeah, I think Indiana's got some pretty good Jimmies and Joes on this football team that people don't realize how good they are because they transfer from JMU or whatever thing you're talking about. You know, if JMU played in the Big Ten, they're not 12-0 and winning the Big Ten championship. There's a reason that teams like that have guys drafted in the NFL every year because they have NFL talent. They just weren't recognized as such coming to high school. And I don't know which fan base is going to be more obnoxious if they win this game, though. That's the only drawback. Whatever fan base wins this game is just going to be unbearable on social media. So I will be staying off of Twitter for that reason. But I do like Indiana this game, 27-17. Yep.
Brian, let's talk about the final game going on New Year's Day night. And it's as disgusting as it is to say, it's the third rematch by the second round of the college football playoffs. But we are obviously talking about number 6 Ole Miss taking on the number 3 Georgia Bulldogs. They're taking them on in the Sugar Bowl. So maybe a little poetic justice potentially for Kirby Smart taking a trip back to the Sugar Bowl down there. But right now, Georgia is favored by 6.5 points. The over-under is set at 55.5 by our friends over at FanDuel. So big matchup in the Sugar Bowl. An SEC team is guaranteed to make it into the semifinals due to this matchup. And like I said, really disappointed. This is the third rematch from the regular season we've seen. And we aren't even at the semifinals yet.
On a personal level, this has got to be a very interesting week emotionally for Kirby Smart. Now, look, everybody knows I have certain issues with Kirby Smart, but he's still a human being. When you think about what happened to him last year with like losing his father and the Sugar Bowl in such a close period of time in the quarterfinals, you advance one full year later, 306, well, actually a little over 365 days because they had to move it because of the terrorist attack last season. And then obviously that part of it too. And it's an opportunity at redemption for Kirby Smart. And he's pretty good at redemption. I mean, we saw him get smacked by Alabama in the SEC title game only to beat them in the national championship game. And I think that's an interesting angle for me is just, it doesn't affect the game at all, but just personally, the opportunity to kind of wash out some bad vibes that's probably been sticking in Kirby's crawl for the last year of, the personal tragedies he went through, both directly and indirectly, and then also obviously what happened on the football field. And it'll be interesting to watch how that goes. The other aspect of it that is more practical is like you said, this is a rematch. And this is a game that Ole Miss, honestly, for a while of that game, looked like they were going to win that game in Athens. I mean, they lost 43-35, but I mean, they had a lead. It was 35-26 before Georgia scored, 2 touchdowns and a field goal. Scored the last, 17 points of the game. And so like Ole Miss led for a lot of that game. So Georgia went up 3-0, and then Ole Miss went right down and scored on their next possession. Georgia went down and scored on 2 possessions later. No, actually, it was their very next possession. And then Ole Miss went down and scored on their next possession to take a 14-10 lead. Then Georgia went down and scored on their next possession to take a 17-14 lead. After that, Ole Miss took went up again, 21-17. That was the halftime score. Georgia kicked field goal, but they led until the fourth quarter. And that's when Georgia kind of took control of that game. So, like, this is a team that won't be scared of Georgia. They beat Georgia last year. So, like, there's not a ton of guys left from that team, the way that their roster's constructed. But, I mean, they did handle business. You wondered kind of what would they be in the playoffs without Lane Kiffin. And I mean, they did win their playoff game, convincingly, 41-10. Jumped on Tulane early, scored 14 points in the first quarter, did kind of put the game away a little bit late with 2 fourth quarter touchdowns, but it was 41-3 at one point in time. They handled their business. I don't think Tulane's very good. I mean, we predicted a blowout in that game. So there's just so many aspects of this matchup, Trevor. If you take the coaching drama away, I think this has a chance to be a good football game again. I think Ole Miss has a balanced offense that can give Georgia problems. Trinidad Chambers can throw the football. They have legit weapons at receiver. Kejuan Lacey is healthy as he's been in a little bit. They should be able to run the football. Their defense is scrappy. It's not as talented as it was last year, but it's a scrappy defense. Georgia's not an elite offense. I mean, they scored 28 against Alabama. They should have scored 2 or 3 more touchdowns. This is not a team that is a light the world on fire offense for Georgia. I know they scored 43 against Oklahoma or against Ole Miss. That's not normally who they are, but that's the concern if you're Ole Miss is, I mean, this is also a team that scored 28 points on Alabama. They scored 16 points against Georgia Tech. They only scored 35 points against Charlotte. Only 24 points against Florida, 20 against Auburn, 24 against Bama, 21 against Bama the first time, 28 against Austin Peay. This is also the team that scored 44 on Tennessee, 43 on Ole Miss, and beat Texas by 25 in November. This has been a very up and down football team. I don't know that I can tell you with good confidence what Georgia's going to look like in this game. But I have to go on Kirby's track record and say he's pretty good in these moments. They lost last year, but they lost last year because they played a team that was better than them in the trenches. They lost last year because they played a team that had athletes that were as good, if not better, than their athletes. We said this going into that game last year. I got into an argument with a former Notre Dame player who tried to tell me that Notre Dame doesn't have the athletes Georgia does. I think that's utter nonsense because I think the 3 best athletes on the field in last year's games played for Notre Dame when you look at like Leonard Moore and Jeremiah Love. But this Georgia team has better athletes than what last year's team had. A guy that started for them last year at corner that Notre Dame took advantage of is no longer starting for them. Their corner position has gotten better since their young kid, Ellis Robinson, and some of those, obviously Dalen Everett are now kind of those guys. I think that they can, match up. The question is, can they get pressure on Ole Miss? They're just not a good pressure team. And that hurt them against Ole Miss last time, Trevor. And they're going to need to find a way to get more pressure this time. But then on the other side, Ole Miss's defense is just really struggles against good athletes. Like they just struggle to beat good athletes. And so can they stop Georgia in this game? I don't think you want to get into a shootout with Georgia in the postseason because I think Georgia will just make the plays they need to make. So I've been so back and forth on this game, Trev, where I 1 minute I'm thinking this is going to be a high-scoring game just like last time, and the other times I'm like, man, I don't know if this is going to be a high-scoring game. I think that we could maybe see a little bit more defense. So just take the coaching side of it apart. I'm back and forth, but I worry about Georgia's O-line because it still isn't playing great. And I do think that Ole Miss has the athletes to hurt the Georgia secondary like they did last time. But at the end of the day, I still just think Georgia overall is just a more physical team and just the better team in this game.
I think this has the makings of I think this has the makings of an offensive affair. I do, because these are 2 defenses that are shades of what they've been in years past. This is not the same Ole Miss defense as last year. Not bad. It's just not as good. I mean, they gave up 35 points to Arkansas, 23 to Kentucky. Yeah, I mean, they allowed 21 points to Washington State, which I thought they were about to get upset. Obviously, we talked about 43 to Georgia, 26 to a dormant Oklahoma offense. They got a little better down the stretch. I like their performance against Mississippi State. Then I like what they did against Tulane, but I think this has the makings of a high-scoring affair. I think the lack of Lane Kiffin will play a factor in this game. Because in the playoffs, it's as much about coaching decisions as it is about some of the guys that you have on the field, which like you said, if you take the coaching matchups away, I think this is a relatively even battle when you look at who the Jimmies and the Joes are, as people like to say. But what started to turn people's heads about Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame? It was that win over Georgia last year, talking about how Marcus Freeman outcoached Kirby Smart. I'm sorry, Pete Golding is not out coaching Kirby Smart. I just don't think that happens. This is going to be the first game where I think that plays a factor because respectfully, you can beat Mississippi State with all the drama going on with Lane Kiffin, and you can beat Tulane at home without Lane Kiffin. I don't know if you can beat Kirby Smart in his backyard playing in the Sugar Bowl. I mean, I don't know if there's a coach in college football that has more big game experience coaching at that level than Kirby Smart does. Pete Golding is 1-0 as Ole Miss's head coach. That was at home against Tulane.
Dabo's the only one that's even close. Dabo and Ryan Day are the only ones that are even close.
Honestly.
Nobody else is close.
And that's the biggest mismatch in this game. It comes down to what you do in those crucial moments. That's my biggest takeaway. And then I start looking at who all's on the team. I love Kawan Lacey. I think he's the best running back in that game on either side of the ball. I do. I like Nate Frazier, but Kawan Lacey's a dude. But then I go back and look, and it's like, okay, I have questions about Georgia's ability to get after the passer. But they're starting to heat up, man. They have 20 total sacks on the season, and 12 of them have came since November 8th. Now, that's still not great. I don't want to paint this picture that they were really bad before and then just absolutely turned it up. But they're getting better. They're starting to heat up in the right moments. Gunnar Stockton is starting to heat up in the right moments. So I like Georgia in this matchup. I think that this is going to be the first game where it comes out that, okay, yeah, we don't have like a head coach. Like, I know they have one by name, but if we're talking coaching matchups, Kirby Smart versus Pete Golding is just not even worth doing a tail of the tape on. So that's where I'm at with this one, man. I mean, final score prediction for me, I do think it's going to be high scoring. I have Georgia winning this one 34-27. I think, to your point, the off-the-field stuff for Kirby Smart, kind of remembering what happened last year and everything that went down with this game, he's somebody that kind of keeps that stuff in the back pocket, uses it for motivation at the right time. Compound that with the fact that Ole Miss is going into this with a very, very, very new head coach who's the leader of the weaker side of the football for you before he was promoted to head coach. This is Kirby Smart's stage. I like the dogs in this one, man. But I do think Ole Miss is talented enough to keep it competitive because I also don't think that Georgia's defense is this vintage dogs defense that everybody likes to talk about. I think the athletes, Kawan Lacey and Trinidad Chambliss, are going to be able to take advantage of this Georgia defense. I just think at the end of the day, dogs pull it out at the end. I have them by a touchdown.
I've been back and forth, Trevor. I originally had a prediction of 24-16, but then I was like, nah, I think it'll be a little bit more points than that. And I also went 24-16 for another game, and I don't want to pick the same score for two games because that's lame. And I part of the reason too is because I don't think either team's defense is great, and I don't think either team's offense is going to be great either. I'm going 28-20, Georgia. I think there will be enough. There will be enough from Georgia offensively. I think they can make enough big plays. I don't think this game is going to look. I don't think he is. I don't think Georgia is. Like, I don't think Ole Miss is good enough on defense to really shut Georgia down but I also don't think that the last game was necessarily indicative of how this game is going to go. Because I think both defenses played poorly in that game. I don't think that is normally how they play on defense. I just think it was a bad game for the Ole Miss defense. They're not a great defense. They don't have the talent they had last year, but they're not that bad. And so, like, that's why I think your score would make more sense than a repeat of the last game. My 28-20 to me also makes sense. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be as sharp for a host of reasons, but the biggest one also being, Trev, is I don't think that I'm not a big fan of these coaches that are trying to do two jobs. And it doesn't work out very often. It's worked out at times, but it doesn't work out very often. It just doesn't. I mean, Notre Dame lost their D coordinator after last year's run, but he went to the NFL. He wasn't interviewing for jobs until right after I think he interviewed for the Bengals job, I actually think right before the title game, if not right, like meaning initial talks. I then think he went and had a more formal one, I believe, after the game. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's how it went down. So I just, that's kind of where I'm at on that. I just look at it and say, I just don't think either offense is going to play great. I don't think either defense is going to play great. I think it's just going to be kind of a sloppy game, which a lot of SEC versus SEC games are in the playoffs because these teams know each other more and better. And that's not a shot at them. It's just when you know a team better, you play in a rematch. It's not going to be an overly, high-scoring, impressive game. And so the rematch of Alabama and Oklahoma or in Georgia in 22 or 21 was a much lower scoring game than the first game. I think it was 41-24 in the SEC title game, and then 33-18, I think, in the championship game. Yeah. And that was with Georgia getting a very late pick six in that game. So that's kind of how I see it, Trev. I don't know that either one of these teams really are going to blow us away with how they play. But you go back to your point that you made earlier about Kirby and this team has way more experience on this level. There's a lot of kids playing for Georgia on Thursday that played in this game against Notre Dame last year. And this team isn't as good. This Ole Miss team is not as good as that Notre Dame team was, especially in the trenches. And I think that this is a much better receiving core than the one they had last year. Gunnar Stockton has now more experience than he had last year. They didn't lose that game because of Gunnar Stockton. That's been a lazy SEC excuse, but he's more prepared for all of the moments now than he was last year. That's going to help him, including playing against this defense once already. And I just think the offensive line is still a concern, but it's not as bad as it was last year. And they don't have Notre Dame's D line on the other side of the field. And they don't have to face Xavier Watts and Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and Drake Bowen. They just don't have to face those dudes that they had to face last year. I just think this is a better Georgia team than it was a year ago. I don't think they're a great team, but I just think they're better than they were a year ago, and the team they're playing isn't nearly as good as the one they played last year. That's why I like the Bulldogs. 28-20.
Absolutely. There's something to be said about a program that you just kind of can't kill. Resiliency is huge once you get to this step. Mm-hmm. I mean, because think about Alabama. I mean, they, for by and large, they didn't look the same as they did from 2009 to 2013 ish. But you kind of they never went away, and that's kind of what Kirby's doing right now. Mm-hmm. I get you. I'm with you completely, man.
So you were 34-27, and then I'm 28-20. So we're pretty close on most of these. I think the only one that we really saw differently is actually the one game where we had the same exact
same margin of score. Yeah.
We just picked different winners. So I think we're pretty close in this one, Trev. So we did have a couple super chats I want to quickly get to before we get out of here. Let me just mark down when we finished this segment real quick. So let's get to some of these super chats. My guy, Black Irish 864, Chris says, Trevor and Brian, will y'all be eating collard greens and black-eyed peas on Thursday? Is that like a New Year's tradition for somebody? Not for me.
I'm not sure. I mean,
I'm not a big fan of either one of those things. The only black-eyed peas I'd ever engage in is maybe there's a song, the one Let's Get It Started. And I don't know what it is about that song, but I like that song. Be running. Yes.
Hey.
So Yeah, but no, I'm not a big collard greens guy. My mom used to try to make me eat collard greens because my mom's country, so she eats collard greens. Never was my thing. And then black-eyed peas, I don't mind in a stew, but it's not really something I'd be making at home. So.
Yeah, I mean, will I be eating them Thursday? I mean, no. But I like both. I like collards. I like mine a little bit spicier. And then black eyed peas, I'm very picky with. You can definitely tell when people make them out of a can or when they like boil them themselves and like kind of make them from scratch, if you will. But Thursday, no, but I'll eat them.
Our girl NH said, I thought it was ham, black-eyed peas, and cabbage for health, wealth, and happiness. Maybe that's part of it, what it came from as well. So I'm not sure what that means. I've never heard of that as a New Year's tradition. So Chris, I'm not sure what that means. He said it's a Southern thing.
Oh,
yeah. My mom did all of our cooking, and she was born and raised in Ohio. So that's probably why. So like I said, collard greens, ham, all that's all. But it's the black-eyed peas are all things that she made and we ate as kids. But it was never like a New Year's Eve tradition for us.
yeah. I'm also unfortunately just not really that Southern. The most Southern thing about me is I was born in South Korea, and I don't really think they're eating collard greens on Thursday. But
I would know.
But I would
touching that one. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man.
And then we have a super chat down here from Patty Fish 4.
Appreciate the super chat. Would you take Notre Dame to beat IU this season?
Yes. I think it'd be a very close game, but I do think Notre Dame is better than Indiana. I think Notre Dame can hang with Indiana in the trenches, and I think Notre Dame is one of the offenses that could be able to move the ball on them. I think they'd have a tough time with the run and pass combination. We said this before. I think part of the reason they didn't want Notre Dame in the playoffs, honestly, is because I think this Notre Dame team can beat anybody. Not saying they would, but I think they can beat anybody. And I do like them in a neutral field matchup. Now, if they'd had to play at Indiana in the opening round for some reason, that would have been a tougher win. But playing on a neutral field, I would have taken Notre Dame in a very close game. I think Indiana's one of two teams that probably matches up the best against Notre Dame because I think their defenses would give Notre Dame the most problems. Notre Dame would have smoked Alabama. Alabama's defense wouldn't have stopped Notre Dame. I think they'd score very well on Oregon. I think Texas Tech, Indiana, and Ohio State are probably the three teams that match up the best against Notre Dame because defensively they can do some things to give Notre Dame's offensive line problems, which is the one weak spot, or not weak spot, but concerning spot for Notre Dame going to the playoffs.
I'll say this too. I'll even take it a step further. I don't think last year's Notre Dame team beats this year's IU team. I think this year's Notre Dame team beats IU's team for a couple different reasons. The edge rush in this year's team is significantly better than it was last year. And their ability to push the ball down the field through the air is better than it was last year against IU. So for those reasons, but in short, Paddlefish, yeah, I would take Notre Dame to beat IU this season.
I like that comment, Trev, and I tend to agree with it. I don't think last year's Notre Dame team beats this year's Indiana team. But I agree with you. I think this year they do. Yeah. And then there was a couple – we're not going to do a mailbag, but there are two questions that I wanted to at least bring up and respond to really quick.
Yeah.
And they're both from Andrew Gilmore. The first one is when Notre Dame was deciding between Deuce Knight and Bear Bachmeier, where did you stand on who Notre Dame should pick? Is Bear going to be a top 5 QB next year? I thought Notre Dame absolutely should have taken Deuce Knight. I still think Notre Dame should have taken Deuce Knight. We don't know that if Deuce Knight was the quarterback at BYU that he would have had as much, if not more success than what Bear Bachmeier had. I think Deuce looked pretty good in his one start for them this year. And obviously people are talking about Deuce because Deuce jumped in the portal, which is not at all shocking. I mean, Deuce played an FCS team, but he went 15 of 20 for 239 yards, 2 touchdowns, and also ran for 162 yards and 4 touchdowns in that game.
Yeah, I think his first snap of his collegiate career was a 75-yard house call.
Yeah. So, as a starting quarterback, because he had played against Ball State in the first game of the year, but first snap as a starting quarterback, 100% was that big play. Bear's a nice quarterback. He's not a top 5 quarterback next year. Top 10 to 15, sure. Bear's a good player. Bear's not a top 5 quarterback. I mean, just off the top of my head, CJ Carr is better than him. Julian Sand is better than him. If they grant Diego Pavia 13th year of eligibility next year, he'll be better than him. You look at some of the other guys in the portal. I mean, I'm not a big Sam Levitt fan. You know this, Trev. I still think he's a better quarterback than what Bear Bachmeier is. Now, Bear will get better. You know, you could argue Drew Mestamaker comes back next year. That's a little bit. I think Josh Hoover's a better quarterback than he is. I would argue that Jade Maeva is right now a better quarterback than he is. Now, that may change next year. Darian Mensah comes back next year. Kevin Jennings comes back next year. Arch Manning, that's another one. Good. Byron Brown is going to be playing in the SEC next year. Trinidad Chambliss might get another. He's trying to get another year of eligibility next season to come back and play. Marcel Reed has another year of eligibility left. He'll get better next year.
He already said he's coming back. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's a nice player, but I don't think he's a top 5 quarterback in college football next year. And I think absolutely Notre Dame made the right decision going after Deuce. It didn't work out. That's life. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But I've also said, too, that I don't ever criticize a team for something that doesn't work out if I wasn't criticizing it at the time. I hate backseat. I hate like 2020 hindsight people that hammer. Now you can say, look, here's why it didn't work out, and maybe here's why you messed up. But I'm not like, what a stupid decision by Gino Guidugli and Mike Dent. Well, actually, Mike Denbrock wasn't here, but Gino Guidugli and Chad Bowden and Marcus Freeman to go with Deuce over Bear because look what Bear's doing. Oh, I mean, I still think Deuce is a better quarterback. Bear just had a better opportunity. You know, we wouldn't be asking this question if Jake Rensselaer didn't get kicked off the team.
Yeah, facts. Well, because Bear probably still would have been at Stanford.
Maybe. But, I mean, he might have started there because their quarterback situation. Brendan Sorsby is coming back next year, the kid from Cincinnati. He won't be at Cincinnati next year, but it's going to be a great year of quarterback play next year. It really is. You know, we'll see. But, yeah, I don't think he's that. And I supported the decision then, and I support the decision. I'm not changing my opinion now. You can look back and say it was the wrong decision based on how things panned out, but then don't pretend like you're going to hammer him for the decision if you didn't hammer him at the time.
Yeah.
I can't stand that. I can't stand that.
Then another one from Andrew Gilmore. Who made the better coaching hire, Michigan State with Pat Fitzgerald or Michigan and Kyle Whittingham?
I like Fitzgerald more, and I think Michigan made a great hire. I think they both had very strong hires. I think Fitzgerald will be better. I think Whittingham is a good coach. I think the biggest benefit there is he's going to stabilize some of the crazy nonsense that's going on. And they'll be a good football team during his tenure. I don't think they're going to be a title contender during his tenure. And with Fitzgerald, I think they needed someone that's going to kind of bring back hard-nosed Big Ten football to Michigan State. And he's putting together a heck of a staff so far.
Oh, yeah.
Michigan State.
I mean, Andrew, this is such a good submission, man. I mean, I don't want to take the cop-out answer, but it's like these are the two best coaches for each of their respective situations. Like, that's what's so tough about the better coaching hire. Because if Kyle Whittingham would have went to Michigan State and Pat Fitzgerald would have went to Michigan, I would have been like, okay. I don't really get that move. But since the roles are what they are, I'm leaning a little bit towards Michigan solely just for what they need right now. I don't know if there's another coach that they could have went and got outside of Kyle Whittingham to help navigate. That was available, like a legitimate option, not what if they got Dabo? It's like, oh, no. But for what they needed to, kind of the image rebuild, I like going with Kyle Whittingham. So Michigan by a slight edge for me, but I agree with what you're saying, man. The Pat Fitzgerald hire at Michigan State is stellar.
I do think they were both good hires. I really do. I do. And what we'll do is when all the dust settles after the season, we will have a show where we grade the coaching hires. And they'll both get very good marks for what they did. I think the problem with Michigan is that they went through such a jaded process that it's kind of like, you know, there's going to be a little bit of that, but it's signed with Penn State. I mean, Penn State ended up with a good football coach. Do you fire James Franklin and you bring in Matt Campbell? No. But if you just forget that part and just say, did you hire a good football coach? Yeah, they did. They hired a good football coach. Same with Michigan. The process was a little bit wonky. Michigan State looks like, you know, brilliant. They waited till they thought they could get Pat, fired their coach, then hired Pat immediately. What a crazy concept. Know who you're going to hire before you fire a coach. Imagine that. Who knew? Like, who knew that sounds like a smart idea. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, in Michigan's defense, they had it's not like just fired him because he was losing games. I mean, there was a lot more to it than that, kind of did, but kind of didn't, that type of thing. But Penn State made their choice, and it was a bad choice. And I don't think their program is in as good of a place now as they would have been had they not fired James Franklin. I still think that was a dumb decision. And we'll do all that when the season's over with, after the title game, maybe even during the playoffs. But I think all the hires have been made now, correct? I think all the head coaching hires have been made now. I don't think anyone else has a opening, do they?
I don't think so.
Wasn't Michigan the last one? So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But I think this is a hire they needed to make to stabilize things.
Agreed.
So anyway, well, good stuff. That was very good stuff. And then that'll be the last question, Trev. So why don't you take us out of here?
Folks, that's going to do it for us.
Hold on a second. Oh, totally kidding. Totally kidding.
That's very well played.
I was like, should I go?
That's very well played.
Are you sure?
Oh, man. That was good. That was very good. Folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We have a show tomorrow. We're going to be off on Thursday, New Year's Day, but we have a show tomorrow. We're doing buy, sell, hold. The thread is already up on the message board, so make sure to get your submission in. Make sure you get your submission in, and then we'll be back again on Friday, the day after New Year's Day. We'll probably have a lot of questions in the mailbag about how the playoffs went down. A lot of different questions there in the Friday free-for-all mailbag. So on your way out of here, make sure you hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. But as always, the best way to stay in tune and the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. See you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.